A man who once dismantled terrorist cells with nothing but a knife and 12 minutes is now mopping floors in a middle school. Nobody knows who he is. He made sure of that. But tonight, a photograph dropped onto his phone. His 13-year-old daughter standing outside the school gates. A man in a black suit standing 20 feet behind her, watching. Below the photo, a single line of text. "We're not finished, Cole." 3 years of silence. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of pretending to be nobody. Gone. Just like that. If you want to know what happens when the most dangerous man in the room has been pretending to be the most invisible, stay until the end. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The mop handle was splitting along the grain, had been for about 2 weeks, and Cole Mercer kept meaning to ask the supply closet guy, Martinez, the heavy-set man who smelled like cigarettes and always had a crossword puzzle open on his phone, for a replacement. He never did. It wasn't that he forgot. It was that asking for things drew attention, and attention was the one luxury Cole Mercer could not afford. He pushed the mop across the linoleum in long, even strokes. The hallway of Ridgeline Middle School smelled like cafeteria grease and cheap industrial cleaner, and underneath both of those, the particular stale warmth of a building that housed 700 children for 8 hours a day. Cole had learned, in 3 years of working here, that you stopped noticing the smell after about 20 minutes. What you never stopped noticing was the sound, the squeak of sneakers, the slamming of lockers, the constant overlapping noise of adolescents who had not yet figured out that the world did not need to hear every thought they had the moment they had it. He didn't hate it. That surprised him in the beginning. He'd expected to hate it. At 4:47 in the afternoon, the building was mostly emptied out. A few teachers were still in their classrooms grading papers or staring at their laptops with the particular glazed expression of people who had been staring at the same document for so long that the words had stopped meaning anything. The janitor's cart squeaked as Cole pushed it around the corner toward the East Wing bathrooms, which were always the worst. 12-year-old boys had a relationship with hygiene that Cole found genuinely baffling, and he'd once spent time in environments where hygiene was not exactly a priority. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It was probably the automated reminder from Ava's school app. She had a history test on Friday, and the app liked to send 3 reminders about upcoming assessments, as if parents were incapable of remembering things without being nudged. Cole found the app mildly irritating, but had never turned off the notifications because Ava liked knowing that he got them. The phone buzzed again. He stopped the cart outside the bathroom door, pulled out the phone, and looked at the screen. It wasn't the school app. It was an unknown number. No contact name, no area code he recognized, just a string of digits that looked almost right but not quite. The kind of number you got when someone was routing through a spoofed line. Cole had not seen a spoofed number in 3 years, but the pattern recognition didn't go away just because you wanted it to. You didn't unlearn that kind of thing. It lived in some part of your brain that operated below conscious thought, the same part that still made him sit with his back to the wall in every restaurant, still made him clock every exit when he walked into a room, still woke him up at 3 in the morning, sometimes for no reason he could name. He opened the message. One photograph. Ava. Standing on the sidewalk outside Jefferson Middle School, her school, 6 blocks from here, with her backpack hanging off one shoulder and her headphones around her neck. She was looking at something on her phone, half smiling at whatever she was reading, completely unaware of anything around her. The photo was taken from a distance, maybe 30 or 40 feet, with a long lens or a good zoom. Whoever took it had been standing near the row of parked cars along the curb. And in the background, barely visible, but unmistakably there, a man in a dark jacket was leaning against a telephone pole, not looking at his phone, not talking to anyone, just standing, watching. Below the photo, one line of text. "We're not finished, Cole." He read it twice. Then he put the phone in his pocket, left the mop cart exactly where it was in the middle of the hallway, and walked to the parking lot. He drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper and a check engine light that had been on for so long he'd stopped seeing it. He'd bought it with cash from a private seller in his first month in Denton, Colorado, because it was the kind of car nobody looked at twice. He'd done the same thing with his apartment, second floor of a 6-unit building on a quiet street, nothing remarkable, landlord who cashed his checks and otherwise left him alone. He'd done the same thing with every part of his life here, each choice calibrated to produce the minimum possible footprint. He drove the 6 blocks to Jefferson Middle in 4 minutes, which was faster than the speed limit technically allowed, and pulled up across the street just as the last of the after-school crowd was dispersing. He sat with the engine running and scanned the sidewalk, the parked cars, the corner, the bus stop down the block. No man in a dark jacket. No one watching. Ava was standing near the front steps talking to her friend Destiny, a girl with box braids and a laugh that carried half a block. They were doing the thing they always did when they were wrapping up a conversation, both of them sort of half turning to leave while still talking, one foot pointed away, neither quite ready to actually go. Cole watched them for a moment. Ava was gesturing with her hands the way she did when she was telling a story, both arms moving, her whole body involved in the narrative. She got that from her mother. He called her Sel. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, I'm literally right outside." "I know. I'm across the street. Come get in the car." A pause. "Why are you okay?" "Fine, just come to the car." Another pause, shorter this time, and he could hear the register of her voice shift slightly. She was 13, not 6, and she could read him well enough to know that just come to the car said, in that particular flat tone, meant something was different. "Okay," she said. "Give me a second." He watched her say something quick to Destiny, who glanced across the street toward the Civic, and then Ava was walking toward him with her backpack bouncing against her back, and her headphones still around her neck, and an expression on her face that was caught somewhere between annoyed and worried. She got in the passenger seat and pulled the door shut. "What's going on?" "Put your seatbelt on." "Dad?" "Ava?" She put the seatbelt on. He was already pulling away from the curb, making a left turn, heading away from their apartment rather than toward it. A pattern break, simple precaution, nothing dramatic, just the habit of a man who had learned early that going home when someone knew where home was required thinking first. "You're scaring me," Ava said. "I don't mean to." He checked the rear-view mirror, nothing obvious. "How was school?" "You drove here in the middle of your shift to ask me how school was." "How was it?" She stared at him for a moment with the particular exasperation of a teenager watching an adult do something she found genuinely maddening, then apparently decided to play along. "Terrible. Mrs. Kowalski gave us the dumbest assignment. We have to write a personal narrative about a moment that changed our perspective on something, and it's due Thursday." "That doesn't sound terrible." "It's terrible because everyone's going to write about their grandma dying or going to a different country. And then there's me, who—" She stopped, looked out the window. "Never mind." He knew what she was going to say. "There's me, who doesn't have anything interesting to write about because my dad made sure of that." She never said it, not exactly, but he heard the shape of it in the silences she left. 13 years old, no real roots, a deliberately boring life assembled by a father who decided that boring was the only safe option. He made another left, then a right, looping back in a long arc toward a commercial strip he knew well, a shopping center with a parking lot that gave good sightlines and 2 exits. He pulled in and parked in the middle of the lot where he could see the entrance and sat with the engine idling. "Okay," Ava said. "You need to tell me what's happening." He thought about what to say. He had been thinking about this moment, not specifically, but the category of moment, the one where some piece of the past came back and he had to decide how much Ava was going to know. For 3 years. He'd imagined it would be more gradual, more time to prepare, a warning sign he could act on before it became a conversation he wasn't ready to have. "Someone sent me a photograph," he said, "of you, at school today." She went very still. "What kind of photograph?" "Just you standing outside. But it was taken by someone you don't know, and they sent it to my phone to make a point." "What point?" He looked at her. She had her mother's eyes, a particular shade of dark brown that looked black in low light, and her mother's habit of going very quiet when something frightened her rather than louder, which was the opposite of how most people responded to fear. Lily had been like that. Still water. "To let me know they know where you are," he said. Ava held his gaze for a moment. Then, "Who are they?" "I don't know yet." Which was true as far as it went. He didn't know who specifically. He had a category, people from before, but before was a long chapter with a lot of names in it, and narrowing it down to one was going to take time he wasn't sure he had. "Does this have to do with whatever you used to do?" she asked. "Before we moved here." "Yes." "Before you were a janitor?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. She'd known, in the abstract, that there was a before. Kids always knew more than adults gave them credit for. Cole had never specifically told her about his service record, about the teams he'd run with, about the places he'd been and the things he'd done there. But he'd also never constructed a fictional backstory, and Ava was sharp enough to notice the gaps. She noticed the way he sat in rooms. She noticed that he never got lost, anywhere, even in a new city. She noticed that when she'd accidentally knocked a glass off the counter last year and it shattered, he'd moved faster than physics seemed to strictly require. She'd never pushed. Maybe she'd been waiting for him to be ready. Maybe she'd been protecting herself from knowing. 13-year-olds had an instinct for which doors they weren't quite ready to open. "So what do we do?" she said. "Tonight we don't go home." She looked at him. "Like, at all?" "We need to make sure it's clear first. We'll get a room somewhere." "Dad, I have school tomorrow." "I know. And I have literally no stuff. I don't even have my phone charger." "We'll figure it out." She exhaled through her nose, a sound he recognized as her version of suppressing something bigger, and looked out the windshield at the parking lot, the strip mall, the ordinary Wednesday afternoon happening all around them. A woman pushing a stroller, a teenager on a bike, two old men outside a hardware store talking about nothing. "Okay," Ava said finally. "Okay, but I'm not sleeping in the car." "You're not sleeping in the car, and I need a toothbrush. We'll stop at a Walgreens." She pulled her knees up and rested her feet on the dashboard, a habit he'd given up trying to break, and stared straight ahead. "You should probably tell me more," she said, eventually. "About before." "I know," he said. "I will." She didn't push it. She just nodded, and he pulled out of the parking lot, and they drove. The Econo Lodge on Route 7 had a night clerk who took cash without asking questions, which was either a reflection of the establishment's general philosophy or the fact that it was 6:30 on a Wednesday, and the man behind the desk was watching a soccer game on his phone with the focus of someone whose entire emotional state was riding on the outcome. Cole paid for 2 nights, took the key cards without making conversation, and got back in the car where Ava was waiting with a plastic Walgreens bag on her lap that contained 2 toothbrushes, a travel toothpaste, a phone charger, and a bag of pretzels. 2 nights? She said when he got in. Precaution. The room smelled like cigarettes despite the non-smoking sign and had a water stain on the ceiling tile above the bathroom that Cole decided to interpret as abstract art. 2 beds, a TV bolted to the dresser, a window with a view of the parking lot that he checked before Ava had finished brushing her teeth. Good sight lines. 1 entrance, 1 window, corner room with a shared wall on only one side. Not perfect, but workable. Ava came out of the bathroom and flopped onto the bed closest to the door, which was not the bed he wanted her in, and he moved her bag from that nightstand to the one beside the window bed without saying anything. She looked at him, looked at the bag, looked back at him. "You want me by the window," she said. "It's fine." "You want me by the window because you want to be between me and the door." He sat down on his bed and took his phone out. "The window bed has better pillows." "The pillows are the same pillows, Dad." But she switched beds without arguing, grabbed the remote, and started flipping through channels with the practiced disinterest of someone who knew she wasn't actually going to find anything but felt obligated to look. He pulled up the photograph again on his phone. The timestamp showed it had been taken at 3:23 p.m. Ava got out of school at 3:15. She'd been standing there for maybe 8 minutes before someone had photographed her, which meant whoever it was had been in position before dismissal. That was planning. That wasn't opportunistic. He zoomed in on the man by the telephone pole. Dark jacket, dark pants, could be any age between 35 and 50 from this distance. Hands visible. No phone, no bag, nothing in them. Just standing. The posture was easy to read once you knew how to read posture. Weight balanced, not leaning into the pole, but resting against it casually, The specific way you learned to stand when you needed to look relaxed while remaining ready to move. Military background, or law enforcement, or both. Cole had stood that way himself more times than he could count. He thought about the number the message had come from, tried to run it through what he knew about routing patterns for spoofed lines. It was patchy, 3 years out of date, and got nowhere useful. He thought about the phrase itself. We're not finished, Cole. Not threatening, exactly. More like a correction. Like someone pointing out an error in your logic. His phone rang. Same number. He looked at it for a moment. Ava had stopped flipping channels and was watching him with her legs crossed and a pretzel halfway to her mouth. He answered and put it to his ear but said nothing. A pause on the other end. Then a voice he hadn't heard in 4 years. You look good with a mop, Mercer. Cole's jaw tightened. Cross. A sound that might have been a laugh. Damian Cross had a voice like weathered stone. Not deep exactly, but dense, like there was a lot of mass behind it. Cole had spent 2 years in the field with that voice in his ear, taking direction, trusting the intelligence it delivered. He'd stopped trusting it 4 years ago, around the time he'd started to understand why Lily had died. Been a while, Cross said. What do you want? I want to have a conversation, a real one, not whatever you've been pretending to have with yourself for 3 years. My daughter was in that photograph. I know. A pause that didn't sound like regret. That was meant to demonstrate capability, not intent. She's not what I want. Then what do you want? The source code. The original military framework. The one you took when you walked away from the program. Another pause. You know what I'm talking about, Cole. Don't do the thing where you play dumb. It's insulting to both of us. Cole looked at the water stain on the ceiling. Ava had put her pretzel down. I don't have it, Cole said. You do. The program was decommissioned. Everything was wiped. Everything official was wiped, Cross said. You made a copy. I know you made a copy because you're you, and you have never in your life trusted anyone else to hold the only version of something important. You made a copy before you walked away because part of you knew you might need leverage someday. And here we are. Cole didn't say anything. The ceiling stain looked at a certain angle like a running dog. I'm not asking you to do anything violent, Cross said. I just need the framework, the base architecture. We can meet, exchange, and go our separate ways. You go back to your mop. Your daughter goes back to her history tests. The fact that Cross knew about the history test hit Cole somewhere behind the sternum. That was recent. That was specific. That was someone inside the school's system or someone who'd been listening to conversations close enough to pick up details. Think about it, Cross said. You've got 24 hours to reach out. After that, I stop being the one keeping the others patient. The others. Cole caught that word and held it. Cross wasn't operating alone. There was a structure behind this call, not just a rogue actor with a grudge. There were stakeholders. People who'd been waiting. Cross, Cole said. Yeah. If you touch my daughter, Cole. The voice was patient, almost gentle. I'm not your enemy. I'm your only option. There's a difference. Think about it. The call ended. Cole sat on the edge of the hotel bed with the phone in his hand and the room very quiet around him except for the distant sound of traffic on Route 7 and the hum of the air conditioning unit that cycled on every few minutes with a sound like an old truck engine trying to turn over. Dad. Ava's voice was careful. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed with the bag of pretzels closed in her lap, watching him with those eyes that looked like her mother's. Are we in danger? She asked. He wanted to tell her no. He had told her no for 3 years in various forms. No, Ava, everything's fine. No, Ava, we don't need to worry about that. No, Ava, I've got it handled. He'd built their entire life in Denton on the foundation of no, it's fine. And she was 13, not 6. And she was smart enough that lying to her now felt like something he'd regret in a way he couldn't fully articulate. There are people who want something from me, he said, and they're using you to make sure I cooperate. What do they want? Something from my old job, something I kept. Do you have it? He looked at her. Yes. She processed this for a moment. So, can't you just give it to them? It's not that simple. Why not? If it makes them leave us alone, because what they want to do with it can hurt a lot of other people. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. The thing they want, it's a kind of technology for manipulating memories, changing what people remember, what they believe happened. If the wrong people have the complete architecture for how it works, he stopped. A lot of bad things become possible. Ava was quiet for a moment. Like, what kind of bad things? Like making someone believe they did something they didn't do, or making someone forget something they need to remember, or building a system that does that at scale to a lot of people at once. He rubbed his face. It sounds like science fiction, I know. It doesn't sound like science fiction, she said. It sounds like the kind of thing people would definitely build if they could. He looked at her. Sometimes she said things that made him acutely aware of how much she had grown up while he was busy trying to keep her safe and ordinary. Yeah, he said, exactly like that. She pulled the pretzel bag open and ate one, looking at the muted television. So what are we going to do? I need to make some calls, people I used to trust. He paused. Some of them, anyway. From before. From before. She nodded. Okay. She held the pretzel bag out toward him. He took one, which he didn't particularly want, but which felt like the right thing to do, and ate it in the dim hotel room while the parking lot lights came on outside and the night closed down around them. Her name had been in the news 8 months ago, which was how Cole had first encountered it, reading the local paper in the break room at Ridgeline Middle during his lunch half hour, a habit he'd maintained partly out of genuine interest, and partly because it was the kind of thing ordinary people did. And ordinary was the costume he wore every day. The headline had been straightforward. Neurocore Technologies CEO announces partnership with University Medical Center for Neurological Research. He'd read it without much interest initially. Tech company partnerships with medical centers were common enough to be unremarkable. Until he'd gotten to the third paragraph and seen the phrase non-invasive cognitive interface and felt something at the back of his neck that was either a draft from the break room air vent or the particular physical sensation of recognizing something he'd tried to leave behind. He'd read the rest of the article carefully. Evelyn Hart, 30 years old, had founded Neurocore 5 years ago out of a postgraduate research project at MIT. The company's flagship product, something called the Cortex Bridge, was described as a medical device designed to help patients with severe memory loss, Alzheimer's patients, traumatic brain injury survivors, by creating what the article called a digital map of existing neural pathways that could serve as a navigational framework for the damaged brain. The medical applications were described in careful, layperson-friendly language that made them sound entirely benign. Cole had put the paper down and eaten the rest of his lunch, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, the same thing he made almost every day because it required no thought, and thought about the phrase digital map of existing neural pathways for a long time, because that was, more or less, what the program had been. Not in those exact words, not in the public-facing language of medical technology, but in the underlying architecture. The program had a name he'd signed enough clearance documents to never say out loud, and what it did, in its original military application, was create a detailed map of a subject's memory structure and then, theoretically, allow selective modification. Theoretically, because it had never worked cleanly in practice. The margin for error was significant. The ethical implications were something the review board had spent 9 months debating before the program was shut down, officially on grounds that the risk-to-benefit ratio was unacceptable. But the architecture still existed. In the research, in the documentation, in the encrypted file on the drive he kept behind the loose baseboard panel in the utility closet of his apartment. The same drive he'd told Cross he didn't have, because having it was the one card he'd kept, and handing it over without understanding the board it was being played on would be the dumbest thing he'd done in a long career that included some genuine contenders. The connection to Neurocore had nagged at him for 8 months, not enough to act on, enough to notice. Now it felt like something he should have acted on. At 9:30, after Ava had fallen asleep with the TV still on, she always slept better with background noise, had since she was small. Cole sat in the chair by the window with his phone and a piece of hotel notepad paper and a pen and tried to reconstruct the network from 3 years of deliberate amnesia. Who was still active? Who had gone to ground? Who had moved sideways into private sector work, which was where most of them went when they left. The security consulting firms, the intelligence contractors, the defense-adjacent companies that were technically civilian but operated in the same dark water they'd always operated in. There were 4 names he wrote down and then looked at for a while. The first was Marcus Webb, former intelligence analyst, Cole's main technical support on 3 operations. He'd gone to work for a cybersecurity firm in Austin after rotating out. Smart, methodical, the kind of man who slept 4 hours a night and spent the other 20 engineering redundancies. If Cole needed someone to trace the origin of a spoofed call or dig into the corporate structure of a company looking for backdoors, Webb was it. The problem was Webb was also careful, more careful in some ways than Cole, and reaching out after 3 years of silence was going to require an explanation. The second name was Petra Olson, former combat medic, later redeployed as a field operative specializing in extraction. She was currently, as far as Cole's 3-year-old information went, working somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. She and Cole had worked together twice, and both times she'd been the reason he'd come home. He owed her. The third name he wrote down and then crossed out. Not because the person wasn't capable, but because Cole had last seen him in a context that had ended badly for everyone involved, and trust, once it broke a certain way, left a very specific shape of scar. The fourth name was the one he stared at the longest, Damian Cross. Not because he was going to call him, but because he was trying to understand the timeline. Cross had been a commander, operations, intelligence coordination, the kind of seniority that came with both access and insulation. He'd never been dirty in any way Cole could have proved. Smart enough to stay clean in every documentable sense while still being, Cole was increasingly sure, the center of something that didn't have clean edges. He thought about what Cross had said. A company that built on deception. He hadn't said that exactly, but the implication was there. The original military program, the architecture, a company that might have been built around it. Neurocore. He picked up his phone and, on impulse, searched Evelyn Hart's name. There were a lot of results. She was the kind of CEO who gave interviews, TED Talks, podcasts, tech conferences, with the easy confidence of someone who believed in what she was building and wasn't hiding anything. She had a face that was slightly too intense to be conventionally photogenic, but the photographs where she was mid-sentence actually talking were more compelling than the posed ones. She was exactly the kind of person who built exactly the kind of company that other people would find useful as a vessel for something she hadn't designed. One result stood out. A news item, 3 days old, from a Denver area tech news site. Small headline, Neurocore CEO Evelyn Hart reported missing from headquarters. Cole read it twice. The article was short, barely 4 paragraphs, and careful in the way local news was when it didn't have enough information to be confident about anything. Hart had been in her office. The building had been locked down for a routine security review. When the review ended and staff returned to the executive floor, her office was empty. No signs of struggle. Security footage from the corridor showed no one entering or leaving the office during the 40-minute window. Her car was still in the parking garage. Her phone went to voicemail. She had, as far as the article was concerned, simply ceased to be in the room. Cole put his phone down on the windowsill and looked at Ava sleeping in the bed across the room, one arm over her face the way she'd slept since she was a baby, her breathing slow and even. "We're not finished, Cole." No, they weren't. He thought about the source code, about what Cross wanted it for, and what someone with Cross's resources could build if they had it, about a 30-year-old CEO who'd apparently discovered something in her own company that someone decided she shouldn't know and had disappeared from a locked room, about a program that was supposed to be dead. He pulled out the hotel notepad and added a 5th item. Not a name. An address, Neurocore Technologies, Denver, 43 miles from Denton, 43 miles from where he'd spent 3 years pretending to be nobody. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. Then he sat with his back to the wall and watched the parking lot through the gap in the curtains and let his mind do the thing it did in the dark. The thing he'd spent 3 years trying to stop it from doing, cataloging angles and distances and points of entry and the particular quality of silence that meant someone was out there versus the quality that meant you were, for the moment, alone. For the moment. He was not the man with the mop anymore. He wasn't sure exactly when that had stopped being true. Whether it was the photograph or the phone call or the moment he'd looked at his sleeping daughter and understood, with a clarity that had no warmth in it, that hiding had never been the same thing as safe. He just knew that it was over. That version of the life. Over. The AC unit clicked on again. The parking lot stayed empty. Ava slept. Cole Mercer sat in the chair and waited for morning, the way he'd waited for morning in a lot of dark rooms over a lot of years, and he started planning. He called Marcus Webb at 6:14 in the morning, standing outside the Econo Lodge in the thin, early light, with a cup of vending machine coffee that tasted like hot cardboard, and a cigarette he'd bummed off the night clerk, even though he hadn't smoked in 2 years. Old habits had a way of making themselves relevant again. Webb picked up on the fourth ring, which meant he'd been awake. Webb was always either fully awake or completely unreachable, no middle state. And the first thing he said was not hello. "I was wondering when you'd call." Cole pulled on the cigarette and looked at the empty parking lot. "You knew?" "I heard some movement in channels I still monitor. Nothing specific, just the kind of noise that happens when someone's restructuring an operation." A pause, and Cole could hear the particular background sound of Webb's workspace, the low hum of multiple computers running, the occasional soft click of a mechanical keyboard. "Where are you?" "Cano Lodge off Route 7, Denton." "You're still in Denton." Webb said it like a fact he was confirming rather than a question he was asking. Was still in Denton. Things moved fast. "Ava with you?" "Yeah." "Okay." Another pause. "What do you need?" This was one of the things Cole had always valued about Webb. The man did not editorialize. He did not say, "I told you this would happen," or 3 years and you're calling me for a favor, or any of the things that would have been, frankly, justified. He just asked what you needed and started working on it. Cole had known a lot of people like that in his previous life, and he'd known a lot of people who were the opposite, and the difference mattered more than almost any other quality when things were moving fast. "Damian Cross," Cole said. A long silence. "Yeah," Webb said. "I was afraid it was going to be that." "What do you know about what he's been doing?" "I know he left the program 8 months after you did. Official story was retirement, 22 years of service, full pension, the whole package. Gave a speech at his going-away thing that 3 people told me was incredibly gracious." Webb's voice had the flat quality it got when he was being precise. "Unofficial story is more complicated. He started a consulting firm, Leverage Strategic Solutions, which is the kind of name you give a company when you want it to sound legitimate without saying anything specific about what it does. What does it do? Mostly it appears to do nothing, which is suspicious in itself. The revenue doesn't match any visible client work, but there are connections. Shell company layers, the kind of structure you build when you want money to move without a clear trail. That point toward neurocore." Cole took a long drag. "How long have you been watching this?" "About 6 months, after the article about the Cortex Bridge came out and I recognized what they were describing." A pause. "I almost called you." "Why didn't you?" Webb was quiet for a moment. "Because you'd built something in Denton, you and Ava. I wasn't sure it was my place to pull you out of it." He said it simply, without apology, but also without defensiveness. Just a man explaining a calculation he'd made and had apparently been reconsidering ever since. "I should have called." "Yeah?" Cole dropped the cigarette and stepped on it. "You should have, but here we are." "Here we are." The keyboard clicking picked up for a moment. "The CEO? Evelyn Hart. She went missing 3 days ago. I saw the article. Locked room, no footage. The no footage part isn't natural. Someone edited the security system. It's sophisticated work, not script kiddie stuff. Military-grade intrusion, which means either Cross's people did it or someone on his level did it, and the overlap between those categories is small." Another click. "I've been trying to trace where she might have been taken. There are 3 properties connected to the Shell network around Leverage Strategic. One in New Mexico, one in Wyoming, and one in Denver proper. An industrial facility in the River North District that was purchased 14 months ago and has been listed as a warehouse for a logistics company that, as far as I can tell, has never moved a single shipment." "Denver," Cole said. "Denver. Webb confirmed. Cole looked back toward the room. Through the gap in the curtain, he could see the television still on from the night before, blue light in the dim room. Ava would be waking up soon. "I need two things," he said. "I need eyes on that facility before I go near it, and I need someone to take Ava somewhere safe while I move." A pause that was slightly longer than Webb's usual rhythm. "Petra's in Fort Collins." "I know. She'd do it. Take Ava, I mean. She has a place that's not connected to anything." "I know she would, but I need to call her myself." He rubbed his jaw, felt the stubble that had gotten past the point of looking intentional. "Can you get me a clean layout of the River North property? Satellite, floor plan, if there's a permit on record, anything structural." "Give me 4 hours." "Make it 3. "Give me 3.5, and I'll also have you the complete corporate structure of NeuroCore going back to incorporation, because I think what's inside that company is going to matter more than the building." A pause. "Cole?" "Yeah. Cross is not operating small. Whatever he built around this, it took years. Patience and resources and people in the right places. Going in blind is, I'm not going in blind. That's why I'm calling you." He said it more sharply than he intended, and then, because Webb deserved better. "I hear you. I'll be careful." "Be careful like you mean it," Webb said. "Not like you used to mean it." Cole didn't answer that because there wasn't a good answer. He hung up and stood in the cold morning air for a moment, then went back inside. Ava was awake. She was sitting on the edge of her bed with her hair still flattened on one side from sleep, eating the last of the pretzels for breakfast with the resigned expression of someone who knew better but was too hungry to care. She looked up when he came in. "You smell like smoke," she said. "I found a cigarette." "You quit." "I know." He sat on his bed and rubbed his face. "I'm going to need you to go stay with someone for a few days." She stopped chewing. "Who?" "Her name is Petra. She's someone I worked with a long time ago. She's trustworthy. More trustworthy than most people I've known. She has a place in Fort Collins that's clean and safe, and nobody connected to any of this knows about it." Ava looked at him for a moment. The expression on her face was complicated in the way teenage faces got when they were processing more than one thing at once. There was fear in it, and there was something that wanted to be angry, but hadn't quite decided on anger yet. And underneath both of those, there was the particular quiet of someone who had been in the passenger seat long enough that they knew when to stop arguing about the destination. "How long?" she said. "I don't know, a few days." "What are you going to be doing?" "Looking for someone." He paused. "A woman named Evelyn Hart. She found something inside her company that she wasn't supposed to find, and now she's missing. And you're going to find her." "I'm going to try." Ava put the pretzel bag down. "Do you have to do this yourself? Can't you call someone official, like actual law enforcement?" "Cross has connections that go deep. If I call the wrong person, then call the right person." "I'm working on knowing who that is." He leaned forward. "Right now, the safest thing I can do for both of us is move you somewhere protected, and then move fast enough that Cross is reacting to me instead of the other way around." She picked at the pretzel bag for a moment. "You sound different," she said. "Different how?" She thought about it. "Like yourself," she said finally, and he didn't know exactly what she meant by that, but it landed somewhere he couldn't quite armor against. He called Petra Olson at 6:45. She answered immediately, which meant she'd either been awake or had his number flagged to wake her up, and either was equally plausible. "Cole Mercer," she said. Not surprised, almost expectant. "Petra, I heard some things. Are you okay?" "I need a favor, a big one." "Ava?" "Yes." "Send me your location," she said. "I'll be there in 2 hours." And that was the entire negotiation. No conditions, no explanations demanded, just a woman who understood that some ass didn't need context. He'd been right about the debt. He'd also been wrong about it, in the way you were always wrong when you reduced a person to what they owed you. She arrived in 1 hour and 50 minutes, which meant she'd been driving before he'd even finished the call. She drove a dark green Jeep Wrangler that was old enough to lack GPS tracking and new enough to be reliable. And she had the same quality she'd always had, the kind of stillness that wasn't absence but compression, like a lot of energy held in a small space. She was 41 now, maybe 42, with close-cropped hair that had gone partly gray and the particular quality of someone who had not softened with time but had maybe gotten more precise about where she pointed herself. She and Ava met in the parking lot of the Econo Lodge, and Cole watched Ava do the teenager thing where she assessed a new adult in the first 30 seconds and made a judgment she would mostly stick to. Whatever she saw in Petra apparently passed, because the assessment resolved into a cautious but not hostile expression. "Your dad says you're good people," Ava said. "Your dad's biased," Petra said. "But he's not wrong." She glanced at Cole. "You look like you slept in a chair." "I slept in a chair." "Of course you did." She looked back at Ava. "You have stuff to bring?" "A Walgreens bag." "I have stuff at the house. We'll figure it out." She said it with the matter-of-fact ease of someone who had improvised in harder circumstances than this, and Ava, who could detect condescension from about 400 meters, apparently detected none and picked up her bag. Cole walked Ava to the Jeep. She threw the bag in the back seat and then turned around and looked at him. And he was aware, not for the first time, of how tall she'd gotten. She was only a few inches shorter than him now, which still surprised him sometimes. She'd been so small for so long, and then time had done what time did. "Be careful," she said. "I will." "Like you mean it," she said. "Not like you usually mean it." And she said it with the exact same inflection Webb had used 20 minutes ago, which meant it was something she'd observed independently, which meant it was something real about him that he probably needed to think about. He pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than either of them usually allowed, and she didn't pull away first, and then she got in the Jeep and Petra drove her away and Cole stood in the parking lot until the Jeep turned out of sight. Then he got in the Civic and drove toward Denver. The River North District sat on the northeast edge of the city, a neighborhood that had been industrial for a century and had spent the last decade trying to decide what it was becoming. Half of it was converted warehouse spaces with expensive restaurants and art galleries, and the kind of coffee shop that charged $6 for something they called a cortado and served on a concrete countertop. The other half was still legitimately industrial: loading docks, chain link, the smell of diesel and rubber from the trucking companies that operated along the viaduct. The address Webb had sent him was in the second half, a squat 2-story concrete building that might have once been a cold storage facility, set back from the street behind a parking area with a chain link gate that currently stood open. The signage on the building said, "Consolidated Freight Solutions," in faded letters that looked like they'd been there a decade, but the paint was too fresh. Details that didn't quite line up. Cole drove past it twice without slowing down, taking in what he could from the street. 3 visible cameras, 2 on the building corners, 1 above the gate, and those were just the ones he could see from a moving car. 2 vehicles in the parking area, both dark-colored SUVs. Both with the kind of general-purpose government-adjacent look that was probably intentional. No visible foot traffic. The building had no windows on the ground floor, which was either original architecture or something that had been done deliberately, and he was betting on the latter. He parked 4 blocks away on a side street where the Civic would look like any of the other aging sedans that populated this part of the city, and he sat with his phone and went through what Webb had sent. The building had been constructed in 1987 as a refrigerated distribution facility. The permit record showed internal renovation work from 14 months ago, the same time the shell company purchased it. But the permits were vague in the specific way you got when someone with the right connections filed the paperwork. General interior renovation, electrical upgrade, HVAC, nothing that would give you a floor plan without going inside. He had no weapon. He'd had no weapon for 3 years. And he felt the absence of it now, not as panic, but as a specific kind of calculation. What he had was the interior of his own head, which was, by most measures, the most dangerous thing he'd ever carried into a building. He called Webb. "I'm outside," he said. "I know. I found a traffic camera 2 blocks east that has a partial view. That parking area is too exposed during daylight." Webb's keyboard was going. "There's a maintenance access point on the north side. A utility corridor that connects to the city's underground infrastructure. Old steam pipes from the district heating system, mostly decommissioned. The access hatch is behind the dumpsters on the north alley. It's not on their security perimeter because it's city property, and they'd need a different kind of clearance to cover it." "How confident are you on that?" 65%. "I've gone in on worse odds." I know. That's what worries me. A pause. Cole, the NeuroCore corporate structure, I finished it. There are 4 senior executives at the company level, below Hart, who have financial connections to leverage strategic. One of them is her chief operations officer, a man named Raymond Voss. He's been with the company since year 2, and the money trail going back 30 months puts him in regular contact with Cross's shell network. Cole absorbed this. An inside man at the company. Someone who'd been there long enough to know the architecture of the place, the systems, the protocols, the access points. Someone who would have known exactly how to make a woman disappear from a locked room without triggering the right alarms. Send me his photo, Cole said. Already did. A pause. There's something else. The Cortex Bridge, Hart's medical device. The public version is what it says it is, a legitimate medical tool, but inside the company's encrypted R&D servers, which I've been very carefully not touching because the intrusion countermeasures are serious, there are indications of a parallel development track, a version of the device that goes significantly beyond the medical application. How significantly? Enough that if it works the way the internal documentation apparently suggests, and I'm working from metadata and file size patterns because I'm not cracking those servers without leaving fingerprints, it would be a complete implementation of the original program's core objective, not a map, an editor. Cole was quiet for a moment in the car. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past on the main street, and a dog somewhere in the adjacent yard was barking at something it either hated or feared. It was hard to tell the difference. She built it, he said. Not as an accusation, more as a piece of the picture snapping into place. She built the framework without knowing what she was building toward. The medical application is real, that part is genuinely hers. But someone guided the research, pushed it in specific directions. Funding that showed up at the right moments, research partnerships that steered the technical development. Webb's voice was careful. She didn't know. Everything I can find about her suggests she would not have agreed to this if she'd known. And then she found out. Something triggered her. 3 weeks before she disappeared, she started pulling internal documents, financial records, R&D reports, vendor contracts, quietly, from her own access credentials so it wouldn't look like an investigation from outside. But if someone was watching her access patterns, they'd know she was looking. Cole looked at the building down the street. They have her in there. I think so, yes. He got out of the car. The north alley smelled like wet concrete and the particular sour smell of commercial dumpsters in summer heat. The dumpsters were pushed against the building's north face, 2 of them, the big green kind. Cole moved between them and the wall and found the utility hatch where Webb said it would be. A steel plate set into the ground, padlocked, with a city utility marker on it that was authentic enough to be genuine infrastructure rather than theater. The padlock was a standard city-issue model, which was good news in a very specific way. Cole had, in a previous life, learned more about lock mechanisms than any person outside of a locksmith or a burglar needed to know, and standard city-issue padlocks were built to a consistent specification that made them straightforward if you had the right improvised tool. He spent 3 minutes with a piece of stiff wire he stripped from the fence line and a tension bar he'd picked up at a hardware store on the way over. Not because he'd planned this specifically, but because a man in his previous profession had a habit of stopping at hardware stores when he didn't know exactly what he'd need, the way some people bought lottery tickets. The lock opened. He lifted the hatch, waited for a moment with the familiar alertness that was less like a feeling and more like a physical state, everything becoming very precise and very quiet inside his skull. And then he went down. The utility corridor was narrow and low-ceilinged and smelled like rust and standing water and the particular underground cold that existed independently of the season above. The steam pipes were still there, a row of them along the left wall, cold and dead but still in place. He moved through it with his phone's flashlight held low, lighting just enough of the ground to not trip on the irregular floor, and he counted the distance in his head until he estimated he was under the building's footprint. He found a second hatch in the ceiling of the corridor, not city-marked this time, newer construction. Whoever had renovated the building above had installed a connection to the utility corridor, which meant either they'd done it as an emergency exit or someone had been smart enough to see the corridor as a potential problem and had decided the solution was to own the problem rather than fight it. Either way, it was his way in. He pushed up on the hatch. It was unlatched. He was in a sub-basement. The space was unlit except for the amber glow of LED indicator lights on server rack equipment. Rows of it, more than you'd expect for a freight company, the kind of hardware that cost real money and required serious power infrastructure. The air was cool and dry, climate-controlled, and there was the constant low sound of ventilation systems doing the work of keeping expensive hardware from overheating. Cole stood still in the glow of the indicator lights and listened. Footsteps above him, one set, moving at a regular pace, the cadence of a patrol route. He counted the interval, about 90 seconds per pass. He moved to the stairs. The ground floor was where it got complicated. He came up through a fire door into a corridor that ran the length of the building, with rooms branching off on both sides. The doors he could see were metal, heavy, the kind that had been retrofitted in, not original to the building. He stayed close to the wall and moved in the direction away from the footsteps he'd heard, which put him at the east end of the corridor. The fourth door on the left was different from the others. It had a keypad lock instead of a keyed lock, and it had a small rectangular window set into it at eye level, reinforced glass with wire mesh inside. Cole looked through the window. The room beyond was set up as a functional if minimal space. A cot, a small table, a single overhead fluorescent that made everything look slightly sick. And sitting at the table with her arms folded and the expression of someone who had made a decision to stay composed because composure was the only thing she had left to control, was a woman Cole recognized from 3 months of looking at her photograph in news articles. Evelyn Hart. She was wearing the same clothes she'd apparently been in when she was taken, blazer, slacks, professional dress that had not been designed for spending an unknown number of days on a cot. Her hair was loose, probably because someone had taken whatever she'd used to pin it up. She had a scratch on her left forearm that had scabbed over, not serious but visible. On the table in front of her was a plate that had been recently emptied. They were feeding her, at least. And a notebook and a pen, which struck Cole as oddly civilized given everything else. She was writing. He rapped twice on the glass, not hard, just enough. She looked up. The composure held for exactly 1 second, and then something shifted in her face, not relief exactly, more like the recalibration of someone who had been operating on a fixed set of assumptions and had just received new data. She stood up and came to the door. "Who are you?" Her voice was low, meant to not carry. "My name is Cole. I'm not with the people who put you here." She studied his face through the glass with the focused attention of someone who made decisions quickly and knew it. "How'd you get in?" "Utility corridor, sub-basement. There are at least 4 guards on rotation." "I know, I've been counting." He looked at the keypad. "Can you tell me the access code for this door?" "I don't have it. They never gave it to me from the inside." She paused. "Obviously." "Right, stupid question." He looked at the keypad. It was a 6-digit model, standard commercial grade, the kind with a 2-second lockout between failed attempts and an alarm trigger after 3 failures, not something he could brute force without making noise. "The man who brings my meals," Evelyn said, "he has a key card. The keypad accepts either the code or the card. I watched him use it. He's due in about—" She glanced at the notebook, and he realized she'd been tracking time in it. "About 40 minutes. I can't wait 40 minutes. "I know." She looked at him steadily. "There's something I need to tell you before you try to get me out. Tell me while we figure out the door." "No." Her voice sharpened slightly, not loud, but definite. "This is more important than the door. What they have built in this building, in the upper floor, it's not what I designed. I built a medical tool. What they turned it into—" She stopped, and he could see her working against something, some internal resistance to saying the next words. "It can do what they claim it can do. The memory manipulation. It's not theoretical anymore. They tested it. On people. Without consent. And the source code they need to complete the weaponized version, they told me about it because they wanted me to help them integrate it. The architecture I built needs a specific algorithmic framework to scale beyond individual subjects." Cole went still. "They told you what the source code is." They described it, yes. And you understand what it would do combined with what you built. I built the hardware and the neural mapping interface. What they're describing sounds like the behavioral modification layer, the part that doesn't just read the memory structure, it rewrites it. Her eyes on his were very clear. If they get it, Cole, it stops being about individual targets. It becomes a system. I know what it becomes, he said. She looked at him differently then. You know about the source code? Yes. How? Because I'm the one who has it. The corridor stayed quiet. The ventilation hummed. Something in her face completed a calculation. They're using you, she said. Not accusing him, just putting it on the table between them. They're trying to, he said. There's a difference. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she stepped back from the door and picked up the notebook from the table and came back. Everything I've been able to document since they brought me here. Names, conversations, technical details, what I've observed. I've been writing it all down. She held it up. If you can get this out, even if you can't get me out. I'm getting you out, he said. You don't know that yet. No, he said, but I'm going to try, and I need you to be ready to move fast and without asking questions until we're clear. Can you do that? She looked at him. He could see her assessing him the same way she'd assessed him through the glass. Quickly, thoroughly, the way smart people assess things when they'd been in a situation long enough that they couldn't afford to be wrong. Whatever she found in the assessment apparently worked. Yes, she said. He stepped back from the door and looked at the keypad one more time and then looked down the corridor. There was an emergency panel on the wall 30 feet away, a fire suppression system interface, the kind that every commercial building of this age was required to have. Cole walked to it, broke the glass with his elbow, and pulled the manual activation lever. The alarm was immediate and very loud, and the overhead light switched to emergency red, and the fire suppression system engaged in the corridor with a hiss of pressurized gas, and from somewhere above him Cole heard the sound of footsteps moving fast and voices calling to each other, and the door to Evelyn Hart's room clicked as the electronic lock disengaged. Standard safety code. All electronic locks released during fire emergency. It was the law, and the contractors who built this place had not thought it through. He pulled the door open. Evelyn was already moving. She came through the door at a walk that was almost a run, grabbed his arm to orient herself in the red-lit corridor, and he turned her toward the fire door, and they moved. Behind them, the sound of footsteps on stairs. Ahead, the corridor, the fire door, the sub-basement, the utility corridor, the hatch, the alley, the city. They made it through the fire door before the first guard cleared the corridor. Cole heard the door slam behind them and heard the guard hit it a moment later, and then they were in the sub-basement with the server racks glowing amber in the dark and the utility hatch in the floor, and Evelyn Hart behind him breathing hard but not speaking. Down, he said. She went down without hesitation, and he went after her, and he pulled the hatch shut above him, and they moved through the utility corridor in the dark, with his phone light and the sound of the building alarm muffled above them, and he counted the distance in his head. And then there was light from the city access hatch above, and he pushed it up, and they came out into the alley between the dumpsters. It was late afternoon. The light was low and orange, and the alley smelled like what alleys smelled like. And Evelyn Hart stood on the pavement in her blazer and her ruined slacks with a notebook clutched in one hand and looked at the sky for a moment, like she was reconfirming it was real. Then she looked at Cole. "Your car," she said. "Where?" 4 blocks, he said. "Can you run?" She looked at him with the expression of someone who had just spent an unknown number of days on a cot cataloging the names of the people who put her there. "Can I run?" she said, and started running. They made the Civic in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, and Cole drove 2 miles before either of them said anything. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat with the notebook on her lap and her hands flat on top of it like she was physically holding the information down, and she breathed with the deliberate evenness of someone bringing their heart rate back under control through force of will. "Where are we going?" she said. "Somewhere I can make some calls." He checked the mirror. Nothing obvious behind them. "And you need to tell me everything. Everything you found in your company and everything they told you while they had you." "Everything I found," she said, and there was something in her voice that had not been there through the door of that room, something rougher, with more edges. "My company." She said it like the words tasted wrong. I built that company from nothing. I spent 8 years building it, and someone was using it the entire time. Not the entire time, Cole said. They got in around you, that's different. Is it? He considered that for a moment. Yes, he said. It is. He drove. Tell me about Voss. She went still. Raymond. He's connected to Cross's network, financially, going back at least 30 months. She was quiet for several seconds, looking at the road ahead. I hired him in year 2. He was brilliant at operations. Actually brilliant, not the kind of brilliant that's just confidence. He could see systems the way other people see individual pieces. I thought... She stopped. I thought he was the person I'd been looking for, someone who understood what I was building and cared about it the same way. He understood it, Cole said. He just cared about different things. Yes. Her voice was flat. Yes, he did. Cole's phone buzzed on the seat between them. He picked it up. Webb. They're moving, Webb said. 2 vehicles left the River North facility 4 minutes ago. One is circling the neighborhood, probably looking for you. The other is heading northwest. Toward Denton? No, toward a private airfield in Adams County. Cole, Webb's voice got careful. Cross is at that airfield. The cell signal I've been tracking that I'm about 70% sure is his phone just activated there. Cole looked at Evelyn. She was watching him with that same quality of focused attention, reading the half of the conversation she could hear. He's not running, Cole said. No, Webb said. He's consolidating. Something shifted when you went into that building. He knows you have heart now. A pause. He's going to use Ava. The words hit somewhere behind Cole's sternum with a force that was not metaphorical. He kept his hand steady on the wheel, kept his voice level. Petra's with her. I know, but Cole, Cross has resources we don't have a complete picture of. If he decides to move on Petra's location, can you reach Petra? Trying now. She's not picking up. The car got very quiet. Webb, Cole said. Still trying. Cole drove. The city moved past the windows. Ordinary life, people walking dogs, a kid on a skateboard, a restaurant with the lights on and people inside eating dinner and not thinking about any of this. Not thinking about locked rooms or memory machines or the particular sick feeling of realizing that the thing you'd spent 3 years running from had simply waited. Evelyn was watching him. She had not asked what was happening on the phone. She'd heard enough. Your daughter, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm sorry. This is... She stopped. I'm sorry you're in this because of me. I'm in this because of Cross, Cole said. And because of choices I made a long time ago. He checked the mirror again. Nothing behind them. He turned north anyway, toward the highway, toward Fort Collins, because Webb was not picking up Petra, and every second of that silence was a wait he was going to drive through before he was going to sit with it. I need to know one more thing, he said. What? The notebook, the documentation you put together. Do you have enough in there to bring this down if it got to the right federal hands? She looked at the notebook in her lap. He could see her running the inventory in her mind. If I had access to the servers, the internal R&D servers, I could corrupt the secondary development track, make the weaponized version unrecoverable without the source code, without the algorithmic framework. The hardware is just hardware. She looked at him. And if you don't give them the source code, I'm not giving them the source code. Then the two halves never connect. She said it with the careful precision of someone who understood the technical architecture well enough to know exactly what the separation meant. But they'll keep trying. As long as Cross has resources and people in place, he'll keep trying. Which is why the documentation matters, Cole said. Evidence to federal hands that can't be bought means he loses the protection that lets him try. He drove. Can you get into those servers? Remotely? Maybe. They've changed my access credentials, but the core architecture is something I designed. There are backdoors that predate Voss, predate everything they did to my company. She said my company differently this time, not with the rawness of before, but with something harder, something that was almost proprietary. Give me a laptop and a clean network connection. I can get you both. He reached for his phone. Webb, if you're still on the line... Still on, Webb said. I just reached Petra. Cole's hands tightened on the wheel. And? She's fine. Ava's fine. They moved locations an hour ago. Petra had a protocol. She didn't take the phone until she was clear. That's why she wasn't picking up. A breath that sounded like a man who'd been holding something for too long, letting it go. They're okay, Cole. The weight did not leave. It redistributed. Shifted from acute panic to the lower chronic frequency of a man who knew the situation was not resolved, just paused. Tell Petra to keep moving, Cole said. Don't stay anywhere more than a few hours. Already told her. Evelyn had gone quiet. She was looking out the passenger window at the highway and the flat land and the last of the daylight bleeding out of the western sky. Cole watched her in his peripheral vision. The set of her shoulders, the notebook still in her lap, the scratch on her forearm, the way she'd run through that alley without hesitating. He'd worked with people who fell apart under pressure. He'd worked with people who held together through training and discipline and the suppression of anything too human. What he was looking at in the passenger seat was something different. A person who was feeling everything and functioning anyway, which was harder and rarer than both of the other options. There's something you should know, he said. She turned from the window. Cross called me last night, Cole said, before I knew where you were. He said he just wanted the source code and then he'd leave us alone. He paused. He was lying. Not about wanting the code, about the rest of it. What makes you sure? Because a man who photographs my daughter outside her school to demonstrate capability is not a man who has any intention of leaving loose ends. He kept his eyes on the road. He needs the code, and he needs your research, and he needs both of us to stop being in a position to talk about what we know. The exchange he's proposing has one version, and none of us walk away from it. She took this in, processed it with the same deliberate speed she seemed to bring to everything. So what's the plan? She said. Cole thought about it. About the notebook in her lap and the back doors she knew and the copy of the source code behind a baseboard panel in an apartment he hadn't been back to in 24 hours. About Webb in Austin with his computers and Petra in motion somewhere north of here with Ava. About Damian Cross at an airfield in Adams County, consolidating, waiting. We stop reacting, Cole said. We go to him. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said, but not blind. Not without something he doesn't know we have. No, Cole said. Not blind. He looked at the road ahead, dark now, the headlights carving a small, bright tunnel in the night. We're going to build something he doesn't know we're building, and then we're going to walk into whatever he sets up and use it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, with the specific gravity of someone making a decision they intended to keep. I can corrupt the weaponized development track remotely if I can access the servers. It'll take time, and I'll need to be careful so he doesn't see me coming. But if I do it right, what he spent years building becomes useless without your code. And if I hold the code and he can't get the hardware component to work, he has nothing, she said. Nothing except evidence of what he tried to do. She glanced at the notebook. Which is what I've been writing down every day since they put me in that room. Cole nodded slowly. Outside, the highway stretched ahead, and somewhere in the dark ahead of them, Cross was waiting with his resources and his patience and the particular confidence of a man who had been operating in the shadows for so long that he'd stopped believing the light could find him. He was wrong about that. He just didn't know it yet. They stopped at a motel outside of Longmont because Evelyn needed a shower and Cole needed to think, and both of them needed to not be moving for an hour. Webb had booked the room remotely under a name that didn't belong to either of them, paid with a card attached to nothing real, and had a laptop waiting via a courier drop at the front desk that Cole picked up without making eye contact with the clerk. The laptop was clean, Webb's word, which was worth more than most people's guarantees. Evelyn was in the bathroom for 11 minutes. Cole counted without meaning to, the way he counted everything. Patrol intervals, distances, time elapsed between variables. When she came out, her hair was damp and she'd put her blazer back on over the undershirt she'd been wearing, and she still had the scratch on her forearm, and she looked altogether like a person who had been through something and was not pretending otherwise. She sat at the small desk and opened the laptop without preamble. "Give me 30 minutes, she said. You said you need a clean network." Webb set up a routing tunnel. It's in the browser bookmarks. She was already typing, navigating with the focused efficiency of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for and had been mentally preparing to look for it since the alley. The back doors I built into the server architecture are keyed to a specific credential set that Voss would have no way of knowing about because I never documented them. I wrote the code myself, at home, offline, the night before I submitted the final architecture to the team. She paused. I do that. Build exits into things. I always have. Why? She glanced at him briefly. Because I grew up watching my father build businesses and hand control to people who didn't share his values, and I swore I would never be in a position where I had no exit. A short, humorless sound. The irony of that is not lost on me. Cole sat on the edge of the bed and called Webb. She's in, Webb said before Cole could speak. I can see the tunnel traffic. She's good. A pause. How is she? Functional, Cole said. Better than she should be. What about you? Same answer. He rubbed the back of his neck. I need to go back to the apartment. Denton? The drive is in the utility closet. I can't do anything without it, and I can't let Cross think I've handed it off somewhere he doesn't know about, because if he thinks I've lost access to it, he stops needing me cooperative. He's still using Ava as leverage, Webb said. Even if Petra keeps moving, he knows you know she exists. The threat doesn't require him to have a location. It just requires you to know he'll look. I know. So going back to Denton for the drive is a risk I'm calculating, not ignoring. Cole stood up and moved to the window. The parking lot was ordinary. Half empty, a family unloading bags from a minivan, a truck driver with his door open and his feet on the dash. What's Cross doing? Still at the airfield? He's been there 4 hours. That's not transit. That's a command post. Webb's keyboard. He's got communications running through a satellite relay I've been trying to unpack for the last hour. I can see the traffic, but not the content. What I can tell you is the volume has gone up significantly since you pulled Hart out of the River North building. He's coordinating. He's coordinating something he thinks is going to happen soon. Whatever timeline he had in mind when he called you yesterday, it's compressed now. A pause. Cole, there's something else. The Shell network. I've been pulling on threads, and one of them leads somewhere I didn't expect. Where? Senate Intelligence Committee. There's a staffer, not a member, a senior staffer, whose financial profile overlaps with the leveraged strategic network. Small amounts, well hidden, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't specifically looking. Webb said it quietly. If Cross has cover at that level, bringing this to standard federal channels is not straightforward. The wrong call goes to the wrong person, and everything you have gets buried before it surfaces. Cole stood at the window for a moment. Outside, the family had finished unloading. The parking lot was ordinary again. Who's the right call? He said. I'm working on it. There's an FBI field supervisor in Denver, a woman named Chen, out of the Organized Crime Division, who has a record of operating without a lot of internal communication when she's building a case. She's burned sources before by talking to the wrong people in her own agency, so now she doesn't. A pause. She's also the person who's been quietly looking at the neurocore disappearance without being officially assigned to it. She had a daughter who benefited from memory-related medical research, which is probably why she noticed the story when other people didn't. Can you get to her directly? I can try. But Cole, she's going to want the evidence before she moves. Not a phone call, not a summary. The documentation Hart put together, the source code context, the corporate structure analysis. Enough that she can act on it without relying on anything from channels that might be compromised. Then that's what we built. He looked back at Evelyn. She was working with the intense focus of someone who had compressed everything else to background noise. Her hands on the keyboard were steady. Give me 6 hours. Cross won't give you 6 hours if he decides to stop waiting. Then I won't waste any of it. He hung up and sat back down on the bed and looked at his phone and thought about Ava. He texted Petra. How is she? The reply came in 2 minutes. Fine, annoyed, making me teach her gin rummy. You okay? He looked at the text for a moment. Ava playing gin rummy with a former field operative in an undisclosed location because her father's past had finally caught up with him. The specific absurdity of it sat on top of the specific guilt of it. and both of them sat on top of something that was just straight fear, the kind that didn't respond to tactical thinking, the kind that just lived in the part of your chest that knew what it would mean to lose the one thing you had no protocol for losing. "Tell her I'll call tomorrow," he sent back. "She knows," Petra replied. "Drive careful." He put the phone down and looked at the ceiling and gave himself exactly 90 seconds to feel all of it. The fear, the guilt, the exhaustion of 3 years of careful constructed smallness that had not been enough. And then he put it somewhere he could carry it without it running him, and he stood up and started planning. The drive back to Denton took 40 minutes. He went alone, leaving Evelyn at the motel with the laptop and Webb on the line and the instruction to call him if anything changed in the satellite traffic pattern. She'd looked up from the screen when he told her he was going and said, "Be careful," and then looked back at the screen, which was both the right response and the one he preferred, because someone trying to talk him out of it would have cost time he didn't have. The apartment building on Clement Street looked the same as it always had. Quiet block, orange streetlights, one neighbor's television visible through a window on the 3rd floor. Cole drove past it once, parked 2 blocks south, and walked back on the opposite side of the street with his hands in his jacket pockets and his pace matching the surrounding environment. Purposeful, but not hurried, the walk of someone who lived nearby. No vehicles he didn't recognize. No figures in parked cars. The building's front entrance looked clean. He went in through the back, through the alley access that the tenants used for trash, which required a code that still worked because no one had thought to change it. Up the back stairs, 2nd floor, the hallway that smelled like someone on the 3rd floor was cooking something with too much garlic. His door. He stood outside it for a moment. Then he opened it. The apartment was how he'd left it. Everything exactly where he'd put it. The minimal furniture of a man who'd never fully committed to the idea that this was home. 2 chairs, a kitchen table, Ava's room with the constellation stickers she'd put on the ceiling at age 10 and never taken down because she said she still liked them. His own room, the bed made with the mechanical precision of old habit. The utility closet was off the kitchen. 3rd shelf, behind the spare filters for the HVAC unit. The baseboard panel on the left wall that had a slight gap where the adhesive had dried improperly, and he'd never fixed it because he'd never wanted it to look like something that had been fixed. He pulled the panel loose and reached in, and his fingers found the drive. He stood there for a moment with it in his hand. It was a standard-looking encrypted external drive, the kind you could buy at any electronics store, which was the point. What was on it was not standard, not the financial records he'd put on it as cover, but behind those, in a partition that required a specific sequence to access, the architectural framework, the algorithmic base that the original program had been built on. The thing Cross wanted. The thing that, combined with what Evelyn had built, would make everything possible. He put it in his jacket pocket. He was turning to leave when his phone rang. Unknown number. Not the same string of digits as before, a different configuration, but the same quality of almost right that told him what it was before he answered. He answered. Cross said, "I know you have heart." Cole kept walking toward the door. "Then you know she's fine." "I know she's with you, which is not the same thing as fine. She knows things that complicate this." A pause. "Cole, you've accelerated a timeline that didn't need to be accelerated. I had a clean exchange in mind. Now you've turned it into something messier." "You had a dead end in mind," Cole said. "There's a difference." A short silence. "You think I was going to kill you?" "I think whatever you were going to do, it wasn't a clean exchange and a handshake." He stopped at the door of the apartment. "What do you actually want, Cross? Not the code. Not heart. What is this for?" A pause that was longer than usual. "You know what it's for?" "I want to hear you say it." "There are people in positions of influence who make decisions that affect millions of people, and those decisions are made in a room the public never sees, based on agendas the public never knows. The ability to modulate memory, selectively, precisely, is not a weapon. It's a correction mechanism, for systems that are too broken to fix any other way." His voice had the patient quality of someone who had been holding this argument in his head for years and had refined it to the point where he no longer heard the parts that were wrong. "You and I both know what we've seen in the field. What happens when the wrong people remember the wrong version of events. This is a tool for making the truth navigable. It's a tool for making the truth whatever you decide it is, Cole said. Same thing, depending on who's deciding. And you think you're the right person to decide. I think the alternative is no one decides and everything stays broken. Cross said it without anger. That was the thing about Cross. He was never angry about this. He was convinced, which was worse. Meet me, Cole. Bring the code, bring heart, and we have a conversation about how this works in a way that doesn't require anyone to get hurt. Where? There's a decommissioned research facility outside Boulder, Meridian Labs. It was a government contract operation closed down 6 years ago. You know the place. You ran an operation out of it in 2019. Cole did know it. That was precisely why Cross had chosen it, because familiarity was a kind of leverage, a way of saying, I know your history, I know your geography, I know more about your world than you've let yourself remember. When? Cole said. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. A pause. Come alone. Hart can come. No Webb, no Olson, no federal contacts. I'll know. You'll know, Cole repeated. I have resources you're not fully aware of. Which is not a threat. It's just accurate. The voice was reasonable. That was always the most unsettling thing about Cross. He sounded so reasonable. 8 o'clock, Cole, and bring the drive. Not a copy, not a partial. The complete framework. The call ended. Cole stood in the empty apartment for a moment. Ava's constellation stickers were visible through her open bedroom door. He looked at them for a second, then left. He called Evelyn from the car. I heard from Cross, he said. He wants to meet. Where? Meridian Labs, Boulder, tomorrow night. A pause. And you're thinking about going. I'm thinking about what we do instead of what he expects us to do when we get there. He drove. How are you on the servers? I'm in. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard from her before, such, not excitement exactly, but the close cousin of it, the specific energy of someone who is doing the thing they are best at under the worst possible circumstances. The secondary development track is more complete than I thought. They've been working for at least 18 months on the integration layer, the part that would connect my neural mapping architecture to the behavioral modification framework from your source code. It's sophisticated work. It's also built on assumptions about how my code functions that are slightly wrong, which means even with your source code, the integration wouldn't work cleanly without someone who understood my original architecture. Which is you. Which is me. A pause. They need me as much as they need the code, which is why you're still alive, Cole said. Cross is smart enough to keep the useful people alive until they're not useful. She absorbed this without comment, which he respected. I can corrupt the integration layer. I can do it in a way that isn't immediately obvious. It'll look intact, but it won't function correctly. And by the time they figure out why, it'll be too late to rebuild it. Another pause. But Cole, there are copies, partial copies, distributed across 3 servers. I can corrupt the primary, but the partials will still exist unless someone physically takes the hardware. Meridian, Cole said, thinking out loud. He's consolidating at Meridian. If the primary development environment is there, then that's where I need to be, she said. Physically present, with access to the systems, to make sure everything I corrupt stays corrupted. A silence. Which means we are going to the meeting. We're going to the meeting, Cole confirmed. Just not the way he expects us to. Webb was on a conference line Cole set up from the motel parking lot, all 3 of them on it, the laptop's camera showing Evelyn at the desk with the screen open and Webb's voice coming from the phone's speaker into the cold night air while Cole stood outside and thought better standing than sitting. Meridian was a 2-story facility, Webb said. Main level had the research bays and administrative spaces. Sub-level was data storage and a protected communication room. The sub-level is where they'd run the hardware if they moved it there. His keyboard. The facility has been officially decommissioned, utilities disconnected. Cross would have brought in his own power supply, which means generator, which means there's a fuel source somewhere on site, which means vulnerability, Cole said, and a timeline. Generators of the size you'd need to run that hardware run on finite fuel. He's not planning a long operation at Meridian. This is an exchange point, not a permanent installation. He wants the code, and he wants Evelyn to do the integration, and he wants to walk away with a functional system, Cole said. All of that at one location, one night. He's been patient, but he's done being patient. What's the play? Webb said. Cole had been building it in pieces since the phone call, the way he used to build operation plans. Not in a linear sequence, but in parallel, multiple variables running simultaneously, looking for the intersections. Evelyn corrupts the integration layer from inside the building, which requires access to the hardware. I'll run interference, keep Cross's attention on the exchange while she works. We need a way to document everything happening in that building, audio, ideally video, in a format that goes somewhere outside the building automatically, not contingent on us walking out with it. I can build you a relay, Webb said, small transmitter, range of about 2 miles, encrypted stream going to a server I control. If you can keep a signal alive inside the building, the sublevel will block it, Evelyn said. She was looking at the screen, cross-referencing something. But the main level won't. If the exchange starts on the main level, which it will because Cross will want visual control of the environment, we start transmitting on the main level, Cole said, before we go down. And the federal contact, Webb said? Chen, Denver field office. I need you to reach her tonight, Webb. Not tomorrow, tonight. Give her the corporate structure analysis and the notation of the Senate staffer connection. Enough to make her want to come to Meridian without it being a phone call that goes through any channel Cross might see. He thought for a moment. And tell her the evidence package is conditional on her arriving at Meridian no earlier than 9 p.m. and no later than 9:30. If she arrives during the exchange, Cross has hostages. If she arrives after is when he has what he needs and no reason to keep anyone cooperative, Evelyn said. She arrives at 9:15, Cole said, and we make sure there's enough on record before that to make the arrest clean regardless of what's happened inside. A quiet on the line. Then Webb. Cole, what's the part you're not saying? Cole looked at the sky. It was clear and very dark this far from the city, and the cold had a weight to it that was more like November than summer, the mountains pulling the temperature down into the valley. He's going to have a complication, Cole said. He always does. Something he holds back until the moment he thinks he needs it. Some piece of leverage that isn't the obvious piece. He paused. I don't know what it is yet. But you think there is one, Webb said. There's always one. He thought about the Cross he'd known in the field, the man who planned 3 exchanges deep, who never committed to a single exit, who once burned a 6-month operation because he sensed something was wrong about a meeting before anything actually went wrong. That man had not gotten less careful with time. He'd gotten more so. We plan around the fact that there's something we don't know, and we stay flexible enough to adjust when we find out what it is. That's not a plan, Evelyn said. That's a disposition. Yes, Cole said. It is. Both things need to be true. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. And then, I want to say something to both of you about tomorrow. Neither Cole nor Webb spoke. I know what I built, she said. I know that the technology at the center of this is mine. My research, my architecture, my work. And I know that someone used that to build something I would never have agreed to, and I know that distinction may not matter much from the outside looking in. Her voice was even, not asking for absolution, just stating the fact of the thing. But it matters to me. And what I do tomorrow, the corruption, the documentation, putting myself in that building, that's not me trying to fix a mistake. It's me doing the thing I should have done the moment I found the first anomaly in the company financials 3 weeks ago instead of trying to handle it quietly. A pause. I should have called someone. I thought I could manage it internally. I was wrong about that, and someone could have gotten hurt because of it. The line was quiet for a moment. You're here now, Cole said. It wasn't absolution either. It was just true. I'm here now, she agreed. They didn't sleep much. Cole managed 3 hours in the motel chair. The chair again, his back to the wall, door in sightline, and woke at 4:30 with the particular alertness of someone whose body had decided that was enough and there was work to do. Evelyn was at the desk, still on the laptop, and he didn't ask if she'd slept because the answer was visible. By noon, Webb had reached Chen. He reported back in a text that was characteristically brief. She wants the package. Sending now. She asked one question. Is the evidence clean? I told her yes. She said 9:15. Cole showed Evelyn the text. She nodded and went back to the laptop. At 2 in the afternoon, she pushed back from the desk and rubbed her eyes and said, "It's done." The primary integration layer is corrupted. It will appear functional in a visual inspection, but when they run the actual behavioral modification protocol, it will fail at the third execution stage, and the failure will cascade backward through the entire system. She looked at him. "It cannot be repaired without rebuilding from the source code framework and my architecture simultaneously, and the rebuilt version will take months, not hours." Can Cross tell it's been done? Not without running the full protocol test, which requires the source code to run. She almost smiled. Not quite. He'd have to use the one thing he doesn't have in order to discover that the thing he does have is broken. "Then we give him the meeting he wants," Cole said. They left for Meridian at 5. The facility sat in a valley east of Boulder that had been chosen, originally, for its isolation, close enough to the city to be logistically functional, far enough out that what happened inside it didn't carry. Cole had been there once in 2019 for an operation that was now classified in 3 separate compartments, and the building itself was exactly as he remembered, a low concrete structure that blended into the hillside so well that you could drive past the access road twice before you noticed the gate. The gate was open now. Someone had cut the lock. He stopped the Civic a quarter-mile out, and they sat with the engine off. "How many people does he have?" Evelyn said. In the field, Cross ran lean. 4 to 6 was his preference. Enough coverage, small enough to move. He looked at the facility. No visible lights from the exterior, which meant they were running without external illumination, using the darkness as cover. But this isn't a field operation. This is something he's spent years building toward, and he'll have staffed accordingly. A pause. "Maybe 12, maybe more." "You can't fight 12 people." "I don't need to fight 12 people. I need to keep 12 people occupied long enough for you to get to the hardware and for Chen to arrive." He reached into the back seat for the small transmitter Webb had couriered to the motel that afternoon. A device the size of a pack of cards, battery-powered, with a toggle switch on the side. Once we're inside and the transmitter is live, everything recorded on your phone goes out. Keep the phone in your breast pocket, camera facing forward, audio running. She took the transmitter and looked at it and put it in her blazer pocket. And the source code. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the drive. He looked at it for a moment, then handed it to her. "Take it." She looked at the drive, then at him. "Cole, if something happens to me and you need it to negotiate, you have it. If nothing happens to me and we get to the server room, you plug it in under the conditions we discussed." He held her gaze. "It's not trust in the technology. It's trust in you." She took the drive without speaking. She held it for a moment, then put it in her inside jacket pocket next to the phone. They drove the last quarter-mile in. Meridian's main entrance was a set of reinforced double doors that had been rekeyed. New lock hardware. The original government issue mechanism replaced with something that currently stood open, propped with a piece of concrete rubble. Someone wanted them to come in without resistance. That was deliberate. Deliberate invitations at the entrance of a controlled space were how you funneled people to where you wanted them. Cole pushed through the door anyway because there wasn't a better option. The main level was lit with portable work lights on stands, the kind you brought to a job site, casting white-yellow pools on the concrete floor and leaving the corners in shadow. The research bays had been cleared of whatever equipment remained from the facility's operational period and replaced with the infrastructure of Cross's operation. A long folding table with communications gear on it, 2 laptops open, a man Cole didn't know sitting at the table and not pretending to work, watching them come in. Against the far wall, 4 men in tactical gear who were making no effort to look casual, 2 more near the stairwell that led down. 6 visible. More somewhere. And at the center of it, standing with his hands in his jacket pockets in the specific way that Cole recognized as Cross's version of relaxed. Not actually relaxed, just configured to project it. Damian Cross. He was 60 now, or close to it. The field gray hair had gone fully white, and he'd cut it shorter than Cole remembered. His face had the particular quality of a man who had spent decades making hard calls, and had long since stopped losing sleep over them. He looked at Cole and then at Evelyn, and his expression showed neither surprise nor satisfaction, just the careful neutral of a man running an assessment. "Cole," he said. "Cross." "Miss Hart." He nodded at her. You look better than I expected. I've had worse accommodations, she said. Her voice was completely steady, and Cole filed that away with appreciation. Did you bring it? Cross said. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might try something creative. Cross walked toward them slowly, unhurried, the way he moved in every environment Cole had ever seen him in, as if the pace of events was his to set. I heard about the River North exit. The fire suppression trigger was creative, a little loud, but creative. 65% odds, Cole said. Cross almost smiled. Webb's number or yours? His. Webb. Cross stopped about 8 feet away. I always liked Webb. Smart man. I assume he's somewhere with an eye on this. I assume you assume that, Cole said. A slight nod, acknowledging the dynamic without conceding anything. So, he looked at Evelyn. You can access the development environment on the sub-level. Full access, primary and secondary systems. He looked at Cole. You have the source code framework. We do the integration here, tonight, with both of you present. Once it's confirmed functional, we have a conversation about next steps that doesn't involve either of you being a problem. You said clean exchange, Cole said. I said a conversation about next steps. The exchange is the integration. After that, we discuss the shape of everyone's future. His voice was careful, measured. I'm not a butcher, Cole. I never was. I need the two of you to not be problems, not to not be alive. Those are different requirements. They require the same thing, Evelyn said. Our silence. Your discretion, Cross said, willingly given or otherwise. The word otherwise landed in the room with its full weight. Cole kept his face level. Beside him, Evelyn was still. The transmitter in her pocket had been running since they stepped through the door. He'd toggled it on in the car. And Webb was on the other end of the stream, and Chen was somewhere in the dark outside moving toward 915, and all of that was real and in motion. What he needed to do was keep cross-talking, keep the exchange from happening too quickly, and give Evelyn the moment to get to the sub-level. Show me the hardware, Cole said. Before I give you anything, I want to see what you've built. A pause. Cross studied him. Why? Because I need to understand what the framework integrates with before I hand it over. If your implementation has architectural errors that make the integration impossible, the code is useless to you, and we've wasted each other's time. He held Cross's eyes. You know I know enough about the underlying system to evaluate what you have. Let me look. Cross was quiet for a moment. This was the calculation, whether the request was reasonable enough to grant or suspicious enough to deny. Cole had built it to land in the middle, in the space where Cross's own desire to show the scope of what he'd accomplished might tip the balance. Sub-level, Cross said. To the two men by the stairwell, take them down. They went down. The sub-level was colder than the main floor, the air recycled by a portable HVAC system running off the generator, and it smelled like warm electronics and the particular sharp scent of systems under load. The hardware was more than Cole had prepared himself for. Rack-mounted servers running in a row along the east wall, connected to a central terminal with a medical-grade interface that he recognized as the physical housing for Evelyn's Cortex Bridge technology. Someone had stripped the consumer casing off the production model and mounted the core components directly into a custom rack, which was sophisticated fabrication work that required either serious technical skill or access to people who had it. Evelyn stood still for a moment looking at it. Cole watched her face and saw something that was not quite grief but was in the same neighborhood. The specific feeling of seeing your own work turned into something unrecognizable. Well, she said quietly. Impressive, Cole said to the two escorts, who didn't respond, because they weren't here to have opinions. He moved along the server rack slowly, looking at the connections, the cable management, the interface between Evelyn's hardware and the server array. He was not reading it technically. He didn't have the engineering background to evaluate the implementation at that level. He was buying time and using the physical movement to understand the layout of the room. One exit. The stairwell behind them, no windows. 4 server racks, the central terminal, a secondary workstation to the left of the main interface. A communication panel on the north wall that was running a status display. System ready, integration pending. Cole looked at the secondary workstation. He looked at Evelyn. She looked at the secondary workstation. A microsecond of shared understanding, the kind that didn't require words because the words would have been too slow. And then Cole turned to the escort on his left and said, "I need to see the communication log on the main interface. Can you pull that up?" The escort looked at him with the expression of someone who hadn't been briefed on whether that was permitted, which meant he was going to look at his partner and there would be a moment of consultation, and Cole used the moment of consultation to take 3 steps toward the escort on the right, which put his body between that escort and Evelyn walked to the secondary workstation and sat down. The first escort said, "Hey, I need to verify the handshake protocol before we run the integration," Cole said, conversationally, to the first escort, putting himself fully in the man's line of sight. If there's an architectural mismatch between the framework and the receiving system, the integration corrupts both. I need 30 seconds on the main interface. That's not... Cross will tell you, Cole said. Call him down. The escort was now doing the thing people did when they received an instruction that conflicted with a previous instruction and didn't have clear guidance on priority. He was reaching for his radio, which meant his hands were occupied and his attention was split, and Evelyn had the secondary workstation's keyboard under her hands and was moving with the speed of someone who had been planning this exact sequence of actions since the motel. Cole heard the radio click, heard Cross's voice, flat and immediate. "What's happening?" The escort said, "The man wants access to the main interface. Why is Hart at the secondary workstation?" Cross said. Not a question. The escort turned. Cole moved. It was not elegant. He was 41 years old and had spent 3 years mopping floors and had not trained seriously in longer than that, and the escort was 20 years younger and trained recently and professionally. What Cole had that the escort didn't have was the willingness to make the first contact before the other person was ready, which was not a fighting technique exactly, but was the most important variable in any physical confrontation, more important than strength or conditioning or skill, and he put his shoulder into the escort's sternum before the man had finished turning, and they went into the server rack together, and something clattered and went dark. The second escort had his hand on Cole's collar before Cole had gotten off the floor. Upstairs, through the concrete of the ceiling, he heard raised voices and then footsteps, multiple sets, and then a sound he recognized with the part of his brain that never fully clocked out, the specific acoustic signature of a door coming open under force. Not Cross's people. Chen. The timing was wrong. 20 minutes too early, which meant either Chen had moved early on her own read of the situation or something had changed outside that Cole didn't know about yet. Either way, the calculus had shifted, and he was on the sub-level floor with a man's hand on his collar and another man getting up from the server rack, and Evelyn was still at the keyboard, still working, her hands moving with a speed and precision that looked almost mechanical except for the fact that her face was doing something very human. The expression of someone who knows they have a finite window and is refusing to waste a second of it. "Keep working," Cole said to her, which was unnecessary because she clearly was not stopping, and he pulled himself to his feet using the escort's own grip as leverage, which brought them briefly face to face, and Cole headbutted the man with the part of his forehead that a former Marine once told him was structurally the most solid component of the human skull, which he had since confirmed through direct experience on 3 separate occasions. The escort sat down hard. The second escort, back on his feet, made a different calculation than Cole expected. Instead of engaging, he went for the stairwell, going up, going to report, or get back up, or both. Cole let him go because stopping him meant leaving Evelyn exposed. Cole stood in the sublevel, breathing harder than he wanted to, with one escort on the floor and one gone up the stairs and the sound of significant activity overhead, and he looked at Evelyn. "How long?" he said. 2 minutes, she said, without looking up. "You have 90 seconds. Then I'll need you to stop talking to me." He stopped talking to her and positioned himself at the bottom of the stairwell and listened to the building above him. The voices had multiplied, and some of them were very authoritative in a way that was distinctly federal. The vocabulary of people executing a warrant, controlled but loud by design, the volume a tool for managing a space. And then one voice cutting through all of it, closer than the rest, on the stairs. Damian Cross. He came down the stairs alone, which surprised Cole, and he was not running. He descended at a measured pace, and when he reached the bottom and saw Cole standing there, he stopped. They looked at each other. Cross said, "Is she in the system?" "Yes," Cole said. "What did she do?" "Corrupted the integration layer, primary and secondary, if she had enough time." He looked at Cross. "It's over, Damien." Cross looked at Evelyn at the workstation. She had not turned around. Her hands were still on the keyboard. "Ms. Hart," Cross said, "if you've done what I think you've done, you've just destroyed years of work." "Yes," Evelyn said, and took her hands off the keyboard and turned around. Her face was calm, with the specific calm of someone who has just finished a thing and is now on the other side of it. "That's what I was aiming for." Cross looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Cole with something that Cole could not immediately categorize. Not anger, not desperation, something closer to the expression of a man revising a model he'd relied on for a long time. "The drive," Cross said. "You didn't give it to me." "No." Without the source code, she can't have corrupted the integration in a way that's actually functional. She'd need it running to target the right execution pathways. Cole said nothing. "Give me the drive," Cross said, "and I'll walk upstairs and deal with whatever Chen brought with her in a way that doesn't implicate you or Hart. You go home. Ava goes back to school. The drive gets used in a way that I'll admit looks bad from outside, but prevents a category of harm you can't see from where you're standing." He said it with complete sincerity. That was the terrifying thing. He meant it. "Cole, you know me. 22 years, you know I'm not the villain in this." "I know you believe that," Cole said. "That's the part that scares me." A long pause. "The drive," Cross said again. One last time. The voice of a man who has made every version of the argument he has. "No," Cole said. Cross looked at him. Then he looked at Evelyn. Then he looked at the stairwell, where the sounds from above were getting closer and more organized. Then he looked back at Cole with something in his face that Cole had not seen there in 22 years of knowing him. He looked tired, not defeated, not broken. Just tired in the way that men got when they had been carrying a certainty for so long that they had forgotten what it was like to set it down. He put his hands up, not because he had to. Chen's people weren't on the stairs yet. He put them up because the calculation had finally come out on the wrong side of the ledger, and he was a man who read numbers accurately even when the numbers were bad. Cole stepped to the side of the stairwell. Cross walked up the stairs with his hands raised and his back straight, and the particular dignity of a man who had been many things and was choosing in this final moment to be someone who did not run. Behind Cole, Evelyn said, "It's done." He turned around. She was standing up from the workstation, her phone in one hand and the encrypted drive in the other, and the secondary terminal's screen was showing a cascade of error codes that scrolled too fast to read individually, but whose collective meaning was clear enough. She held the drive out to him. He took it and looked at it and put it in his pocket. "The transmitter, Pusu?" he said. "Running the whole time." She held up her phone. "Webb has it." Above them, the facility was filling with the controlled noise of a federal operation taking hold. Orders, responses, the mechanical sounds of equipment being secured. Cole could hear Cross's voice somewhere up there, calm, cooperative, the voice of a man who had already shifted from operational mode to legal strategy mode, because that was what intelligent, dangerous men did when the operational play ran out. Cole looked at the sub-level. The servers, the hardware, Evelyn's technology stripped of its casing and built into something she hadn't designed, the small, defeated form of the escort still sitting against the wall holding his nose. He looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him with her blazer on and her hair still slightly damp from a motel shower 12 hours ago, and the scratch on her forearm that nobody had bothered to treat, and a phone and a drive and the expression of someone who has been through a thing and is standing on the other side of it and is now in the process of figuring out what that means. "We should go upstairs," Cole said. "Yes," she said. They went up. The main level of Meridian looked like a room that had been rearranged by a strong wind. Cross's communications gear had been pushed to one side. One of the laptops was on the floor with its screen still on, and 3 of his people were zip-tied and sitting against the east wall, with the particular expression of men who had made a career calculation that was now obviously wrong. Two federal agents in body armor were processing the space with the methodical efficiency of people who had done this enough times that the tension of it had become routine, which was its own kind of strange to watch. Chen was standing in the middle of it. She was shorter than Cole had expected, which was his own projection. He'd built a mental image from Webb's description, and the image had been wrong. She was maybe 5'4", with close-cropped natural hair and the bearing of someone who had learned to take up exactly as much space as the situation required, and not a square inch more. She was looking at Cross, who was standing with his wrists bound in front of him and his face composed, and she was looking at him the way a person looked at a problem they had been working on for a long time and had finally, at some cost, solved. She turned when Cole and Evelyn came up the stairs. "Mercer," she said. "Agent Chen." She looked at him for a moment with the careful neutrality of a federal law enforcement officer who had a lot of questions and was deciding which one to start with. Then she looked at Evelyn. "Ms. Hart, are you injured?" "Scratch on my arm, nothing serious." "We'll have the medic look at it." She turned back to Cole. "Webb told me 9:15. I was here at 8:50. "I noticed?" "I moved early because the satellite traffic Webb was monitoring spiked at 8:40. Someone inside this facility sent a message to an outside contact. I didn't know what it said, but I didn't want to find out after the fact." She said it matter-of-factly, not apologizing, but explaining. "What happened on the sublevel?" Evelyn corrupted the integration system. The weaponized version of the Cortex bridge technology is non-functional now and will require both the source code and her original architecture to rebuild, which is going to take months at minimum and requires her cooperation, which she has declined to give. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the drive. "This is the source code framework, the original military architecture that the program was built on." Chen looked at the drive. She did not reach for it. "That's classified material." "It is." "You've been in possession of classified material for 3 years." "I have." A pause. Her expression did not change in any dramatic way, but something behind it shifted slightly. The recalibration of a person updating their picture of a situation. "I'm going to need a full accounting of that." "I know," Cole said. "I'm prepared to give one." He held the drive out. "But I need this to go somewhere it can't be buried, not into an evidence locker that a Senate staffer with the right connections can access. Somewhere it goes into federal archive under seal with multiple agency oversight." She looked at him steadily. "You know about the Hill connection?" "Webb found it." "Webb?" She said the name with the specific tone of someone who had a professional feeling about a person they'd never met. "I've been trying to find that connection for 4 months. How long did it take him?" 6 hours, Cole said. A short silence. Then Chen reached out and took the drive and held it in her palm and looked at it for a moment. "Multi-agency oversight is not a standard evidence disposition," she said. "It requires a specific classification of material and a specific threat assessment to justify the handling protocol." "I know." "I can make the argument," she said. "It will take a few days and it will require conversations with people above my pay grade." She looked at him. "In the meantime, this goes in my personal custody. Not the locker. Mine." "That's what I was going to ask for," Cole said. She put the drive in her jacket pocket and looked at Cross. Damian Cross had not moved from where he was standing. He was watching the exchange between Cole and Chen with the attentive quality of a man who was already building his legal defense in his head, cataloging what had been said and not said, identifying the gaps. He was going to be a problem in a courtroom. Cole knew that, Chen probably knew that, and Cross knew they both knew it, and none of that changed anything about this moment. "You knew about the Senate connection," Cross said. He was addressing Cole, not Chen. "You knew and you went to Chen anyway." "Because Chen doesn't talk to the wrong people," Cole said. Cross looked at Chen. "Smart," he said, to neither of them specifically. "Mr. Cross," Chen said with the particular flat courtesy of law enforcement, "you have the right to remain silent. I'd strongly suggest you exercise it." Cross looked at her and then at Cole one more time. A long look, not hostile, not pleading, the look of a man doing a final assessment of the board, and then he nodded once and looked at the floor and said nothing else. Chen turned to one of her agents. "Get him processed." Then she looked back at Cole. I need both of you at the Denver field office tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, full statements, everything, documented. She looked at Evelyn. Including what you found in your company, Ms. Hart, and everything you were told while in custody. I want it all. You'll have it, Evelyn said. Chen nodded. She looked like a woman with approximately 40 hours of work ahead of her, and the particular energy of someone who had been trying to get to this moment for long enough that the exhaustion of it had not quite caught up to the relief. She moved away toward her team, already talking into her radio, already on the next thing. Cole stood in the middle of the room and looked at the space around him. The zip-tied men, the displaced gear, the work lights still running, the door propped open to the cold night outside. He had a headache that had been building since approximately noon and had crested somewhere on the stairs. His shoulder, where it had hit the server rack on the sublevel, was going to be significantly worse tomorrow. Evelyn was standing a few feet away, looking at the door, looking at the dark outside it. "You okay?" Cole said. She considered the question seriously. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me in a week." That was honest enough. He respected it. He called Petra from outside, standing in the cold with the facility's light behind him and the empty valley in every direction. She picked up on the first ring. "It's over," he said. A pause. "Ava? Can I talk to her?" Another pause, shorter, and then Ava's voice, and the specific quality of hearing your kid's voice after a night like this one was something Cole did not have language for and was not going to try to find. "Dad? Hey, are you okay? You sound like something hit you." "Something did hit me. I'm fine." "Something hit you." Her voice climbed slightly. "What?" "I'm fine, Ava. Really. It's done." He leaned against the exterior wall of the facility. "You can come home." A silence that lasted long enough that he thought the call had dropped, and then, like, home, Denton? "For now, yes." He thought about what came after that, the FBI office tomorrow, and the weeks of debriefing that were going to follow, and the legal proceedings that would be slow and complicated and would require his involvement in ways he hadn't fully calculated yet. All of that was tomorrow. "Tonight I just need you to go to sleep somewhere safe, and tomorrow we'll figure out the rest." "Okay," she said. And then, "Dad?" "Yeah." "Were you scared?" He looked at the sky. Same sky as last night, cold and dark and very clear this far from the city. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. "I'm glad you were scared. It means you were being realistic." He was quiet for a moment. "You sound like your mother." A pause that had a different texture than the others. "Yeah?" "Yeah." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Get some sleep." "You too, in an actual bed." "I'll try." He hung up and stood outside for another minute with the phone in his hand and the cold working through his jacket, and he let himself feel the thing underneath all the tactical calculation, the specific relief of a man who has walked back from the edge of a very specific kind of loss, and is standing on ground that is, for this moment, solid. Then he went back inside because there was still work to do. The next 72 hours were the administrative aftermath of a night that had felt, while it was happening, like it existed outside of normal time. It turned out that the dismantling of a years-long intelligence conspiracy generated an enormous amount of paperwork, and Cole Mercer sat in a conference room at the Denver FBI field office for 8 hours on the first day and 6 on the second, going through everything he knew in a sequence and at a level of detail that was both necessary and genuinely exhausting in the way that pure language-based work was exhausting for a man whose competence had always expressed itself more comfortably in movement. Chen ran the debriefings herself, which he appreciated. She asked good questions, specific, non-leading, the kind that were looking for what he actually knew rather than confirmation of a theory she'd already built. She recorded everything, stopped to clarify when something was ambiguous, and did not editorialize about the choices he'd made over the 3 years in Denton. When she got to the part about the drive and the 3 years he'd spent in possession of classified material, she asked her questions and wrote down his answers and moved on, which was either professionalism or the recognition that some conversations had a time and place, and this was not it. Evelyn's debriefing ran parallel in a different room. Cole knew this because he passed her twice in the hallway, once on a break, once at the end of the second day. And both times she had the focused, slightly diminished look of someone pouring a large amount of information out of themselves in a controlled and careful way. The second time they passed in the hallway, she stopped. "Voss," she said, "Raymond, they arrested him this morning." "I heard. He's cooperating." She said it with a flatness that had a lot underneath it. "Chen told me. He's been cooperating since 6 a.m. Cole thought about what that meant for the case. The inside knowledge that Voss carried, the corporate paper trail, the financial connections. A cooperating inside source at that level was going to cut years off the evidentiary process. "That's good," he said. "I know." She looked at the hallway floor for a moment. "He came to my office on my first day at the company and told me he believed in what I was building. I still remember what he said." She looked up. "I was 25 and I had no money and no idea whether any of it was actually going to work. And he came in and told me that the science was real and the application was right and that I should keep going." A pause. "He meant it. At the time, he meant it. And then at some point, the thing I was building became more valuable as something else, and he chose the something else." "People change their math," Cole said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Yours changed too, didn't it? At some point. Whatever you believed when you were in the program, something changed." It was a perceptive thing to say, and he took a moment with it before answering. "I believed in the application," he said. "The original military use, there were genuine scenarios where what it could do would have saved lives. I believed that. And then I watched what it became when the people around it started seeing it as a general-purpose tool and not a specific use one." He paused. "The thing about powerful tools is they don't stay specific use for long. Someone always sees the general application." She nodded slowly. "That's what I missed," she said. "I was so focused on the specific use that I didn't think hard enough about what someone else would see when they looked at the same thing." "You thought about it eventually," Cole said. "That's why you started pulling the documents 3 weeks ago." "Too late." "Late," he said. "Not too late." She held his gaze for a moment and then nodded once, not grateful exactly, but acknowledging, and went back into her debriefing room, and Cole went back into his. The political piece took longer and moved at the pace of things that moved through institutions, which was to say it moved slowly and with a lot of friction and required patience that Cole had not historically been good at and had to develop out of necessity. The Senate staffer Webb had identified a man named Garrett Puhle, who had been a senior aide to the Intelligence Committee for 9 years, was placed on administrative leave within a week of Meridian, which was fast by Washington standards, and indicated that Chen had found something in the financial connections clean enough to act on quickly. The leave became a criminal referral by the end of the second week. The referral became an indictment 30 days after that. Webb called Cole the morning the indictment was announced, which was a Tuesday in early October, and Cole was sitting at the kitchen table in the Denton apartment drinking coffee that was actually good coffee, a brand Ava had picked up at the grocery store because she'd decided that the coffee he'd been buying for 3 years was depressing. The apartment felt different than it had in September. He hadn't changed anything about it, but something about the way light came through the windows seemed less provisional than it used to, less like a temporary arrangement. "Pool," Webb said. 10 counts. Wire fraud, conspiracy, 3 counts specifically related to the unauthorized handling of classified research materials. A pause. "His lawyer's already talking to the prosecutor. He'll flip. And when he flips, whoever he was connected to above him goes into the net." "How far up does it go?" Cole said. "I don't know yet. Far enough that Chen has been very quiet about it for 2 weeks, which means she's being careful, which means she thinks it goes somewhere she doesn't want to spook." A pause. "You doing okay?" "Yeah." "Ava?" "She's back in school. She wrote her personal narrative about moving around a lot when she was young." Cole looked at the window. "Mrs. Kowalski gave her a B+. A B+. Ava was annoyed, said it deserved an A. "Did it?" "I'm not objective." He drank his coffee. "How are you, Webb?" A pause that was slightly longer than usual, which for Webb meant something. "Tired, but the good kind. The kind where you're tired because you did something, not the kind where you're tired because you've been waiting." "Yeah," Cole said. "I know that kind." The NeuroCore piece moved on its own timeline, which was separate from the criminal proceedings, and in some ways more complicated. The company's board convened an emergency session in the third week of October and released a statement acknowledging that illegal research had been conducted by employees without the knowledge or authorization of the company's founder, which was lawyered language for we are distinguishing between the company and the people who abused it, and which Evelyn had apparently negotiated hard to get phrased in a way that didn't preemptively doom every project NeuroCore had ever run. Cole saw the statement online and read it twice and thought about the conversation in the FBI hallway and the things she'd said about thinking about the specific use without thinking about the general application. And he thought she was probably still thinking about it, probably would be for a long time, and that was not a comfortable thing to carry, but it was the honest version of being a person who had built something that got used wrong. He texted her, saw the statement, good language. She replied 20 minutes later, my lawyer deserves the credit. I just told her what I needed it to say. And then, after a pause, I have a meeting with the board next week. They want to discuss the company's future direction. Will you be in Denver? He thought about it. He had nothing scheduled in Denver. He also had, increasingly, less reason to stay in Denton specifically versus anywhere else, now that the thing that had required him to stay small and stay invisible was no longer operative. He'd been thinking about this in the way he thought about most things, not confronting it directly but letting it circle at the edge of his attention until he understood it well enough to look at it head on. I can be, he sent back. Good, she replied. And then nothing else, which was how she ended most communications. The point made, no filler attached. The meeting with the board was at NeuroCore's offices, which Cole had never been to. The building was in the tech corridor south of Denver, a glass and concrete structure that managed to look both corporate and aspirational, the kind of architecture that said we are serious and we believe in what we're doing simultaneously, which took some doing. Cole arrived early and sat in the lobby and watched people move through the space and tried to calibrate what he was looking at. A company that had been, simultaneously, exactly what it said it was, and the vehicle for something it hadn't agreed to be, and was now in the process of figuring out which parts of itself were still intact. Evelyn came down to get him herself, which he hadn't expected. She looked different in this building than she had in any of the contexts he'd seen her in. More anchored, like a person standing on ground that was specifically theirs, even though it had recently been disputed ground. How was the drive? She said. Fine. Good coffee in the building across the street. I know that place. She walked him toward the elevator. The board meeting is going to be interesting. 2 of the members are trying to argue for a controlled sale of the company. The rest want to stay independent and restructure. The elevator doors opened. I want to stay independent. What do you need from the board for that? A vote of confidence and a restructuring plan that's credible enough that the institutional investors don't panic. She pressed the button for the 6th floor. The restructuring plan is what I want to talk to you about. Cole looked at her. What part of it? There's a division I want to create, security and victim support, for the people who were involved in the illegal testing. 3 confirmed subjects, possibly more that we haven't identified yet. People whose memories were interfered with without consent, who are going to need support that is specifically designed for what happened to them, and not just general psychological services. She looked at the floor indicator. And the company has ongoing security vulnerabilities that I clearly did not address adequately the first time. I need someone who understands both the technical side of what was done here and the human cost of it. The elevator opened on 6. Evelyn, Cole said. I'm not offering you a job right now, she said, walking out. I'm telling you what I'm building. What you do with that information is up to you. He followed her out of the elevator into a corridor that had the particular quality of a space recently cleaned of something. Not literally, but in the sense of a place where things had been removed and the removal was still visible in the arrangement of what remained. Doors that used to have nameplates now had blank holders. A corner office at the end of the hall had its blinds drawn and its nameplate removed, and he didn't ask whose it had been. The board meeting was not his meeting. He sat to the side of the main table as an observer while Evelyn presented the restructuring plan to 9 people who ranged from visibly supportive to visibly skeptical. And he watched her work. She was not performing. That was the word that kept coming back to him. She was just saying what she thought, in language precise enough that the skeptical board members couldn't find obvious gaps to push through, and she was doing it without making the case more polished than it was. At one point, a board member asked her directly whether she could guarantee that nothing like the illegal research program would happen again. And she said without hesitation, "No, I can't guarantee that. What I can do is build the oversight and security architecture that makes it as difficult as possible and as visible as possible if someone tries." A pause. Guarantees in situations like this are what people offer when they don't understand the situation well enough to know better. The board member who had asked the question was quiet for a moment and then wrote something in his notebook. The vote was 7-2 in favor of the independent restructuring path. Afterward, in the hallway outside the conference room, Evelyn said, "The two who voted against will come around or they'll sell their seats. Either way, we move." She looked at him. "What did you think?" "You told them the truth even when the truth was inconvenient for your argument," Cole said. "It's the only argument I know how to make." "It's the right one," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "The division I described, the security and victim support work. I wasn't just telling you what I was building." She said it with the directness that seemed to be her default mode, no ceremony around it. "I was describing a job, if you want it." Cole was quiet for a moment. He thought about the apartment in Denton with the constellation stickers on Ava's ceiling. He thought about Ava's B-plus personal narrative and Mrs. Kowalski and the friend named Destiny who had watched from across the street when he'd picked Ava up in a panic that now felt like it belonged to a different season. He thought about what Ava had said, "You sound like yourself," and what that meant, and whether the self she'd heard in that moment was a self he wanted to keep being, or a self that was just useful in a crisis. He thought about the mop handle with the split in the grain that he'd never gotten around to replacing. "The subjects," he said, "the people who were tested on. What do you know about their current situations?" "One is in a long-term care facility. One is functioning but experiencing significant memory gaps that are affecting his daily life. One is a woman in her 30s who doesn't know what was done to her. She knows something is wrong, but she hasn't connected it to neurocore." Evelyn's voice was even, but it was the evenness of someone working to keep it that way. "All three are going to need significant support, and they're going to need someone to tell them the truth about what happened, which is going to be one of the hardest conversations anyone has had with them. Who tells them? I was thinking I should be the one to start those conversations." She held his gaze. "But I'd want someone in the room who understands both what the technology did and what the person sitting across from me is going to need." Cole thought about Lily, about memory, and what it meant to have pieces of it interfered with or taken, about how the shape of a person's understanding of their own life was built out of what they remembered and what they forgot and what they never knew they'd lost. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I'm asking." He drove back to Denton and picked Ava up from school, which he still did most days because the habit had started as security and become something else. The 20 minutes in the car where she told him about her day with both arms moving because her whole body was involved in whatever story she was telling. Today she was telling him about a conflict between two of her friends that he followed imperfectly but listened to carefully because the content mattered less than the fact that she was talking. He told her about the board meeting. Not everything, but enough. That Evelyn was rebuilding the company, that there might be a different kind of job in Cole's future, that Denver was being discussed. Ava was quiet for a moment. They were at a red light and she was looking out the window at a dog tied to a bike rack outside a coffee shop, a big, ridiculous golden retriever who was very earnest about watching the door. "Would we move?" she said. "I don't know yet." "To Denver?" "Maybe. I haven't decided anything." She looked at the dog for another moment. "I don't hate Denton," she said, "but I also don't love it. It was just where we were." A pause. "I think I'd be okay with Denver." "Yeah?" "There's a school there that has a better art program." She said it like it was information she happened to have, not like she'd been thinking about it, though Cole was reasonably certain she had been thinking about it. "Destiny says she might move to Denver next year anyway because her mom got a job offer." "Destiny's moving to Denver." "Maybe." The light changed. "I'm just saying, it's not like Denton is the only option." He drove. "When did you look up the schools?" A pause. "Last week." "You've been thinking about this since last week." You've been thinking about it longer than that, she said. You just think I don't notice when you're running calculations. He laughed. It came out of somewhere that hadn't been accessible for a long time. Not a polite laugh, not a social laugh, just the genuine involuntary sound of something being funny in a way that also happened to be true. Ava looked at him with the expression of someone who was pleased but trying not to show it. Art program, he said. Really good one, she said. They had a student show last spring, and one of the pieces got picked up by a gallery in Low-Do. You've done a lot of research. I had a lot of time at Petra's. She looked back out the window. She's good at gin rummy, by the way. Like, unreasonably good. I think she's been hustling people at cards her whole career, and the field operative stuff was just a side project. Don't tell her I said she's good, Cole said. It'll go to her head. It's already there. They were quiet for a block. The afternoon light was doing the thing it did in October in Colorado, coming in low and sideways, making ordinary things look slightly more significant than they were, the kind of light that made you notice what was actually in front of you. Dad, Ava said. Yeah. The woman, Evelyn, the CEO. She said it looking at the window. What about her? Is she okay, after everything? He thought about how to answer that accurately. She's building something, he said. That helps. Does she know what she's doing helped you too? Ava said. Like, coming out of... She gestured vaguely. All the hiding. Cole looked at the road. I think she knows some of it. You should tell her the rest. Ava said it with the simplicity of someone who hadn't yet built up the complicated reasons adults had for not saying direct things to each other. People should know when they've helped. He drove and thought about that. 3 days later, he was back in Denver. Not for a meeting. He'd called ahead and asked if Evelyn had an hour, and she'd said yes without asking why, which he appreciated. They met at the coffee place across from the NeuroCore building, the one she'd mentioned knowing, which turned out to be the kind of small, serious coffee shop run by a person who cared very specifically about extraction ratios and temperature, and would tell you about both if you asked, and probably a little if you didn't. They sat at a corner table with their coffees and the mid-morning light coming through the window, and for a moment neither of them said anything, which was comfortable in the way that silences between people who have been through something together could be comfortable. The job, Cole said. The division you're building. She looked at him, waited. I'll do it. He held his coffee. But I need it to be real. Not a gesture and not a PR position. The subjects. The 3 people who were tested on, they're the center of it, not a feature of the pitch. And if there are more we don't know about yet, we find them. That was always the intention, she said. I know. I'm saying it out loud so we're clear. She nodded once. We're clear. And the security architecture, I'll need full access to the company's systems, not liaison access. Full operational access with the authority to close vulnerabilities without going through 3 layers of approval. Done. He looked at her. You're agreeing fast. Because these are all things I already decided. She held her coffee with both hands. I asked you because I thought about who I wanted in the room when this got hard, and you were the answer. Not because you're a SEAL or because you know the technology, but because you understand what it costs when something goes wrong and you don't look away from that cost. A pause. Voss was brilliant. You're someone who doesn't rationalize. Cole was quiet for a moment. I rationalized for 3 years. Staying in Denton, keeping Ava small and safe, telling myself the drive was just leverage and I didn't have to decide what to do with it. And then you stopped. When I didn't have the option anymore. Most people don't stop even then, she said. That's the difference. He drank his coffee. Outside, the street was doing its mid-morning thing. Foot traffic, a delivery truck double parked, 2 people having an argument outside a dry cleaner with the specific energy of an argument that had been going on in some form for much longer than this particular conversation. My daughter looked up schools, he said, in Denver. Evelyn's expression shifted in a way that was very small but visible. There are good ones. She found one with an art program. Jefferson Park area. I know that school. Their program is genuinely good. A student had work in a Low-Do gallery last spring. He looked at her. She told me the same thing. Smart kid. Terrifyingly, he said. She smiled, not the almost smile he'd seen in the sub-level, the real version, the one that rearranged her face in a way that was less polished than her professional expression and more interesting for it. Bring her to Denver, she said. The art program deserves the student. He thought about the constellation stickers on Ava's ceiling in Denton. He thought about how Ava had put them up at age 10 because she'd liked them, and how she'd kept them because she said she still did, and how that was both true and also the kind of thing you held on to when everything else was uncertain because it was familiar. He thought about whether a 13-year-old who'd been through the last 2 weeks of her life deserved some familiar, or whether she was actually more ready than he'd been giving her credit for to let some things go and start something new. He was pretty sure he knew the answer. She'd told him herself, in the car, with both arms gesturing and her whole self involved in the telling. He paid for both coffees, despite Evelyn's attempt to split it, which she let him win without much argument, and they walked out into the October light that was doing its October thing, making everything look slightly more significant than usual, the buildings and the street, and the ordinary fact of two people standing on a sidewalk having gotten through something and figuring out what came next. Monday, she said. If you can start Monday. I can start Monday, he said. She nodded. She started back toward her building, and then she turned around, which he hadn't expected. Cole. Yeah. What you did at Meridian, carrying that drive for 3 years, making the call when it mattered. She paused, and he could see her deciding whether to say the rest. It mattered. I want you to know that I know it mattered. He looked at her. He thought about what Ava had said. People should know when they've helped. You too, he said. The servers, the notebook, all of it. He held her gaze. You didn't have to build exits into your own code. Most people wouldn't have thought to. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way she did when something was acknowledged and didn't need more words, and turned and walked back toward her building. Cole stood on the sidewalk for another minute. The delivery truck had finished its double park and pulled away. The argument outside the dry cleaner had apparently resolved, or moved inside. The ordinary city was doing its ordinary thing all around him, unhurried, unaware, just the accumulated texture of a lot of people going about their lives in the same place at the same time. He had a lot of calls to make. Webb, to tell him what he'd decided. Petra, because she deserved to know. The FBI liaison contact to confirm the next round of depositions. The school in the Jefferson Park area, to ask about enrollment procedures for a 13-year-old whose records were in a school district in Denton, Colorado. The apartment on Clement Street would need to be packed. Ava's constellation stickers would need to come down from the ceiling, and whether she took them with her or left them was a choice she could make herself because she was 13, and that was exactly the kind of choice a 13-year-old could handle. He took his phone out and started with Webb, because Webb had been in this from the beginning and deserved to hear it first. I took the job, Cole said, when Webb picked up. A pause. Neurocore? The new division. The sound of someone turning this over. Director title? We didn't discuss titles. You should discuss titles. Webb. I'm serious. Organizational clarity. I'll discuss the titles, Cole said. Are you happy? A longer pause. I'm glad you're not mopping floors anymore, Webb said. Not that there's anything wrong with mopping floors. There's nothing wrong with mopping floors, Cole agreed. It's just not what I'm for. No, Webb said. It's not. And Cole could hear the smile in it. Not performed, just present, the way Webb's feelings were always present in the small gaps between his precise sentences. Denver suits you better anyway. I've been there twice. Good food scene. I'll let Ava know you have opinions about the food scene. Tell her gin rummy with Petra was a trap, Webb said. Petra hustles. Everyone finds out eventually. She already figured that out, Cole said. He hung up and looked at the street and started walking back toward the parking garage, past the coffee shop and the dry cleaner and the ordinary Tuesday Denver was having. And he felt the weight of the last 3 years differently than he had on any given day inside them. Not gone. Not resolved into something neat and finished, but redistributed again, sitting in a different place in his chest, in the place where you put things you've carried a long time and finally set down somewhere that feels like it might last. It was not a perfect feeling. It wasn't supposed to be. He was not a man built for perfect feelings, and he'd made peace with that a long time ago, or was in the process of it, which was probably the most anyone got. He got in the car and drove north toward Denton and his daughter and the constellation stickers, and the next part of what came after. The first thing Cole did on his first Monday at NeuroCore was get lost. Not badly. He found the right floor eventually. But the building had a logic to it that took some learning, the way all buildings did, and he'd arrived early enough that the woman at the reception desk was still logging into her computer and hadn't quite finished her coffee, and gave him directions that were slightly wrong because she was reciting them from memory while thinking about something else. He ended up in the wrong wing for about 4 minutes before he found the right corridor, and he thought, walking back, that getting lost on your first day was probably a better start than not. It meant the place hadn't been built around you, that you were going to have to learn it on its own terms. His office was on the 4th floor, which had previously housed NeuroCore's legal and compliance team before the restructuring reshuffled the layout. The legal team had moved up to 5. Cole's division, which Evelyn had titled, after the conversation about titles that Webb had correctly insisted on, the Integrity and Recovery Division, had 4 offices on the 4th floor's east side and a conference room that looked out over the parking structure and beyond it, a slice of the Rockies on clear days. Today was clear. He stood at the conference room window for a moment and looked at the mountains and drank the coffee he'd picked up from the place across the street, which he'd already decided was going to be a daily thing, and he thought about what Webb had said on the phone the week before. Good food scene. It was such a Webb thing to say, not "I'm glad you're there," or "this is the right move," just a sideways acknowledgement that the environment was a good one, spoken in the language of someone who expressed care through practical observation. Evelyn found him there at 8:15. "You're in the wrong room," she said from the doorway. "I know, I just needed a minute with the view." She came and stood beside him and looked at the mountains. She was in a dark blazer, a different one than the one she'd worn through the worst of it, and she had her hair pinned up again the way it probably was the day she disappeared from her locked office. And she looked like herself in this building in a way that had more weight to it now than it would have before. The specific weight of someone who had contested for the right to stand in a particular place and won. "The 3 subjects," she said. "Chen's office sent over the full case documentation last night. I put it on your desk." "All 3 confirmed?" "And a 4th. A woman in her 40s, a former NeuroCore contract employee from 18 months ago. She left the company because she was experiencing what her doctor called unexplained episodic memory disruption. She never connected it to the company." A pause. "She's been in therapy for a year trying to understand what's wrong with her." Cole looked at the mountains. "Does she know yet?" "No. That conversation is next week. Chen is sending a victim advocate, and I'll be there, and I'd like you there if you're ready." "I'll be ready," he said. He went to his actual office, which had a desk and a chair, and a window that looked at a different angle of the same sky. And he opened the case documentation Chen had sent and spent the first 2 hours of his first day reading about 3 people, now 4, whose lives had been altered by something they hadn't agreed to and hadn't known was happening to them. He read it with the kind of attention he'd once given to mission briefs, not because the skill set was the same, but because the stakes were. And because reading sloppily about people who had been treated sloppily was its own kind of insult. The first subject was a man named David Carver, 61, who had been a logistics consultant hired by NeuroCore for a 3-month contract. He was now in a long-term care facility in Colorado Springs, where his family had placed him after he became unable to maintain basic daily functions, not because the procedure had physically damaged him, but because the specific memories it had targeted were ones his identity and competence depended on. He could not, the documentation said, reliably remember how to perform tasks he had performed his entire working life. His wife visited twice a week. His adult children visited less often because they found it too hard. Cole read this and sat with it for a long time before moving on. The second was a man named Theo Park, 38, who was functioning but had what the medical documentation described as significant autobiographical gaps, entire periods of his life that he had either no memory of or false memories of, the fabricated impressions the procedure left in place of what it removed. He was currently living in Boulder, working a reduced schedule at a tech firm, trying to navigate a life where the map didn't match the territory, and he didn't know why. The third was a woman in her 50s, Margaret Osei, who had been a participant in what NeuroCore had told her was a voluntary cognitive research study, which was the cover story Voss had used to access subjects under a framework that looked legitimate from the outside. She was in a care facility in Aurora. She remembered her children's names, but not consistently. She had good days and bad days, the documentation noted, which was the kind of sentence that carried more weight the longer you looked at it. The fourth, the woman who didn't know yet, whose therapy had been trying to explain something she had no framework for, was named Sandra Reyes, and she was 44, and she had a daughter who was 9. Cole put the documentation down and looked at his window for a while. There was a version of this kind of work where you kept emotional distance from the cases because the distance made you more effective. The clinical version, the professional version, the version that a lot of people in a lot of fields adopted because feeling the full weight of what you were reading about would make the reading impossible to sustain. He had operated that way before, in other contexts, because other contexts required it. He didn't think this context required it. He thought this context actually required the opposite, that the people in these files deserved to be read about by someone who let the weight land, who didn't process them as cases first and human beings second. He thought that was, in fact, the whole point of why he was here rather than someone else. He picked the documentation back up. The legal proceedings moved through the fall with the grinding consistency of institutional machinery that has been properly loaded and set in motion. Cross's trial date was set for February, which meant depositions through November and December, and Cole gave 3 of them, long technical sessions where he walked federal prosecutors through the history of the program, the architecture of the source code, and the specific chain of events from the photograph of Ava on the sidewalk to Meridian. He was a clear witness because he didn't editorialize and didn't try to shape the narrative beyond what he'd actually observed, which was what prosecutors wanted and what defense attorneys found difficult to work around. Evelyn gave 5 depositions. Cole knew this because she mentioned it once, briefly, in the way she mentioned things that were hard, factually, without asking for a response, just placing the information in the shared space between them. 5, she said, walking past his office one Wednesday afternoon. They keep finding new angles. And she kept walking, which meant the update was informational and not an invitation, and he respected that distinction. Raymond Voss cooperated fully. His testimony about the internal NeuroCore operation filled in the parts of the picture that Cole and Evelyn's documentation couldn't cover. The specific communications between Voss and Cross, the funding mechanism that had been built to look like standard research investment, the timeline of how the weaponized development track had been concealed inside the legitimate company. The prosecutors described his cooperation as extraordinarily detailed, which Cole took to mean that Voss, having made his decision to flip, had made it completely. Whether that was conscience or self-preservation was probably both, in proportions that didn't particularly matter for the outcome. Garrett Poole, the Senate staffer, was less cooperative initially, and then more cooperative when the evidence made the math clear. His testimony opened a thread that led to 2 other political connections, both peripheral, people who had received money in exchange for information access rather than active participants in the scheme, and both of those threads eventually resolved into plea agreements that were less satisfying than trials but faster, and speed, Chen told Cole during one of their periodic check-ins, was what the victims needed. The longer this stays in the news as an ongoing proceeding, she said, the longer those 4 people can't put it behind them. Please close chapters. Does it close chapters for them? Cole said. Chen was quiet for a moment. No, she said. But it closes the chapter that involves courts and lawyers and depositions and their names and documents. The other chapters are different work. That's what my division is for, Cole said. Yes, she said. It is. David Carver's family was the first contact Cole made directly. He went to the care facility in Colorado Springs on a Thursday in November with Evelyn and the victim advocate from Chen's office, a woman named Rosa who had been doing this specific kind of work for 12 years, and who had, in 12 years, not made it smaller than it was, which Cole could tell in the first 10 minutes, and which made him trust her immediately. Carver's wife, Janet, was 60 years old and had the look of someone who had been in a sustained state of grief for long enough that it had restructured around her daily life rather than interrupting it. She met them in the facility's family meeting room, which had been decorated with the particular institutional cheerfulness of rooms that housed hard conversations, plants, neutral colors, chairs that were more comfortable than they looked. Janet Carver listened to what Cole said without interrupting. He thought carefully about how to say it, and he said it in plain language without technical vocabulary, because the technical vocabulary was for courts and depositions, and Janet Carver was a woman who had spent 14 months watching her husband lose himself and deserved plain language more than precision. What was done to David? Why? What it meant for his recovery? What the company was committing to in terms of medical support and financial restitution? What Cole's division was going to do and what it couldn't do, which he said explicitly because telling people what you couldn't do was as important as telling them what you could. When he finished, Janet Carver was quiet for a long time. She looked at her hands and then at Evelyn and then at Cole. He used to do the crossword every morning, she said. In pen. He was good at it. She looked at her hands again. He can't do it anymore. He tries and it... She stopped. It's not that he gets the words wrong. It's that he can't hold the clues in his head long enough to work them. He gets one and then it's gone. No one said anything because there was nothing to say that would help, and saying something unhelpful would be worse than silence. He told me last month that he was sorry, Janet said. He didn't know for what. He just said he felt like he should be sorry for something. She looked up. He wasn't. He didn't do anything. They did this to him and he's apologizing for it. Cole held her gaze. We know, he said. And the people who did it are going to be held responsible for it in every way we can make happen. He paused. I can't give you the crosswords back. I wish I could. What I can do is make sure that David has the best possible support for where he is now, and that you have support too, because 14 months of this without knowing why. He stopped. That's its own injury. Janet looked at him for a moment. Are you a doctor? No. What are you? He thought about how to answer that accurately. Someone who understands what it costs, he said, when something like this happens to people who didn't deserve it. She nodded slowly. Then you can come back, she said. I don't want people who are going to explain things to me, but you can come back. He came back 3 more times before the end of the year. Not with Rosa, not with Evelyn, just himself, because Janet had said she didn't want people who explained things at her, and he'd taken that literally and tried to be a person who just showed up. He didn't have a clinical role with David. He sat in the family room and drank bad facility coffee and talked to Janet about David before, because before was what she had and she wanted to use it. And he listened to the crossword stories and the stories about how they'd met and the specific humor David had that didn't map onto the general description of him, and he understood, over the course of those visits, that grief and love were using the same words because they were the same thing at different angles. It was hard work. It was also the most useful thing he could remember doing in a long time, which was not the same as saying it felt good, but was related. Theo Park was harder in a different way. Park was functional, which meant he went to work and paid his bills and had conversations that looked normal from outside, but was living with the specific disorientation of a person whose internal experience of his own history didn't match what could be verified externally. He knew things had happened that he didn't remember. He also thought he remembered things that hadn't. The two conditions existed simultaneously, and he had no reliable way to know, in any given moment, which was which. Cole met with him 4 times between November and January. Park was sharp and thoughtful, and asked technical questions about the procedure that Cole answered as accurately as he could. And there was something both useful and painful about those conversations. Useful because Park needed to understand what had been done to him in order to begin constructing something coherent around the damage. Painful because the understanding, once it was complete, was not comfortable to live inside. In their 3rd meeting, Park said, I have a memory of my father's funeral. I was 14. I remember what I was wearing, what the weather was like, what the specific smell of the room was. He looked at Cole. My father is alive. I've confirmed this. He's 71. He lives in Tacoma. We talked on the phone last week. A pause. So whose funeral is that? Cole didn't have an answer. He said so. I know you don't, Park said. I'm not asking you to answer it. I just needed to say it to someone who'd understand why it matters. I understand why it matters, Cole said. Park nodded. The therapist I was seeing before I knew any of this. She kept trying to help me tolerate the uncertainty. She was good at her job, but she was helping me tolerate something she didn't know the cause of, and it turns out tolerating it and understanding it are completely different things. Yes, Cole said, they are. Understanding it doesn't make it better, Park said. No, Cole said, it doesn't, but it makes it yours. The confusion is yours, the loss is yours, and nobody can take that away from you or tell you how to feel about it. He paused. What was done to you was someone deciding that their goals mattered more than your experience of your own life. Understanding that clearly is the beginning of pushing back against it. Park looked at him for a moment. You talk like someone who's been told their version of events wasn't real. I've been told a version of that, Cole said. Different context. How do you push back against it? Cole thought about the mop, about the utility closet and the drive behind the baseboard panel, and 3 years of making himself smaller than he was, about Ava saying you sound like yourself. You do the thing that is actually yours, he said, the thing that isn't contingent on anyone else's version of the story, something real and specific that belongs to you regardless of what they tried to make you believe. Park was quiet for a moment. I'm going to visit my father, he said, in Tacoma. I've been putting it off because I was scared that seeing him alive would make the funeral memory worse somehow. He looked at his hands. But I think you're right. Seeing him is something real. The funeral isn't. Cole didn't say anything. Sometimes the most useful thing was to not fill the silence. Park went to Tacoma in December. He sent Cole a text the day after the visit. No words, just a photograph. A man in his 70s and a man in his late 30s standing outside a house with the Pacific Northwest gray behind them, both of them looking at the camera with the slightly formal expression people got when someone was holding a phone at them. They were clearly related. The resemblance was in the line of the jaw, in the posture, in something around the eyes. Cole looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he texted back, "Good." Sandra Reyes was the hardest conversation of all, not because of what had been done to her, but because of what she didn't know yet when he walked into the room. She was sitting in a therapist's office, not a facility, her own therapist's office, a private practice on the east side of Denver, when Cole and Evelyn and Rosa arrived, and she looked at 3 people she didn't know coming into her regular weekly appointment with the wariness of someone who had learned to be wary of surprises. She was 44 and looked it in the way that people look their age when they'd been having a hard time. Not badly, not unwell, just carrying something visible. Her daughter Mia, 9 years old, was in school across the city. Sandra had arranged care for after school just in case the appointment ran long, which meant she'd been told something important was coming and had been responsible about it. And something about that detail, the arranging of childcare in advance of bad news, hit Cole somewhere that didn't have a clean name. He let Evelyn start because Evelyn was the one who needed to say the first part. She did it in the plain language they'd agreed on. What NeuroCore had done, what the contract employment had actually involved, what the research study Sandra had participated in 18 months ago had actually been. She said it clearly, and without minimizing it, and without excessive qualification, and she said at the end, "I'm sorry, not as the company's representative, personally. What was done to you was done by people who worked for me, and I didn't know, and I should have known, and I'm sorry." Sandra Reyes was quiet for a long time. Her therapist, a woman named Dr. Adkins, who had been Sandra's anchor through a year of inexplicable symptoms, was sitting to Sandra's left with the expression of someone putting a very large and painful puzzle together in real time. "The memory problems," Sandra said. "The gaps." "Yes," Evelyn said. "The reason I can't remember the first 2 weeks after Mia's 8th birthday." "Yes." Sandra looked at her hands. Her jaw was tight. "I thought I was getting early dementia," she said. "I thought I was losing my mind. I have a 9-year-old, and I thought I was going to lose my mind." She looked up. "I went to 3 doctors. 2 of them ran tests. One of them suggested it might be anxiety-related, which I I almost believe that because it's easier to believe you're anxious than to believe something is actually wrong with your brain. I know, Evelyn said. You don't know, Sandra said, and it wasn't hostile, just corrective. You can know it factually, but you don't know what it's like to put your daughter to bed and then lie awake trying to figure out which of your memories are real. Evelyn took that. Didn't apologize again, didn't argue, just took it. Cole said, Ms. Reyes, I'm Cole Mercer. I run the division that's been built specifically to support you and the other people who were affected by this. He leaned forward slightly. I can't give you back the 2 weeks around Mia's birthday. I can't make the uncertainty of the past year stop having happened. What I can do is make sure that from right now forward, you have everything you need. Medical support that knows exactly what was done and can work with that specific knowledge, financial restitution, and someone whose job is to actually understand what you're dealing with, not just manage it at a distance. Sandra looked at him. What do you actually understand about it? It was a fair question, and he didn't deflect it. I understand what it's like to have your version of your own life interfered with, he said. Not the same way, but the category of it, having someone else decide that their agenda mattered more than your experience of your own life, well, I understand that. He paused. And I understand that understanding it doesn't make it better, but it makes the support different, less like management and more like someone actually seeing what it is. She looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were dry. She'd been through enough appointments, enough hard conversations, that she'd probably already processed the version of this moment she'd been preparing for. And the actual moment was landing differently than the prepared version, which was always how real things landed. My daughter, she said. Does she need to know any of this? Not right now, Cole said. And the conversation, if you ever decide to have it with her, is yours to have in your own time and in the way that makes sense for her. Nobody is going to do that for you or without you. Sandra nodded slowly. She looked at Dr. Adkins, who had been very still through all of this and who now leaned forward slightly and put her hand on Sandra's for a moment, which was the right move and the human one and the only one that was actually available in that moment. Okay, Sandra said. Okay. She looked back at Cole. You said from right now forward. Yes. Then let's start from right now, she said. Tell me what this actually looks like. He told her. All of it. The specific medical support, the therapist who had experience with the precise neurological profile of what had been done to her, the financial package, the legal process, and what her role in it would be, and what it would not require her to do if she didn't want to. He told her what the other 3 subjects had experienced and were experiencing, not with names because that wasn't his information to share, but enough that she knew she was not singular, not inexplicable, not crazy. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I want to ask you something. Okay. The people who did this, are they going to prison? Cross goes to trial in February. The evidence is strong. He paused. I can't guarantee the outcome of a trial. What I can tell you is that Chen's office has more evidence than they need, and a cooperating inside witness, and a documented paper trail that goes back years. What about the smaller ones? The people who were in the room when it happened to me? Cole looked at her. I don't know who was specifically in the room, he said, but Chen's investigation is still open. If you can tell us anything about what you remember from the study appointment, anything about the people, the environment, what was said, that information is useful. I remember the man's watch, Sandra said. The one who ran the appointment. It had a blue face. And he called someone on the phone during the session and said something about the 4th subject being compliant. She looked at Cole steadily. I didn't know what that meant when it happened. I thought it was just medical language. I thought I was in a normal study. That detail goes to Chen, Cole said. Today. Good, Sandra said. He called Chen from the parking lot outside Dr. Adkins' practice, while Evelyn waited in the car and the November sky did its November thing. Low and gray, the mountains invisible behind it, the city looking smaller without the backdrop. Chen said, blue-faced watch, and the phrase 4th subject. I'll pull the internal communications from the period of her appointment. If someone was on a call, there's a record. A pause. Cole. Yeah. She's doing okay? She's doing what people do when they find out the thing they feared turned out to be something someone did to them, Cole said. Which is worse and better at the same time. Worse because it's real. Better because it has a shape. Yeah, Chen said. I know that one. She was quiet for a moment. The trial's in February. You'll need to testify again, probably 2 days, possibly 3. I know. How's the division? We're 4 people in a conference room with a good view, he said. Ask me in 6 months. 6 months, she said. I'll mark it. He got in the car. Evelyn was looking at her phone, answering something, the particular posture of someone who was always working not because they were compulsive, but because the work was genuinely unfinished and the unfinishedness bothered them. She put the phone down when he got in. Dr. Adkins called me, she said. Sandra's staying for an extra hour. Good. She said Sandra wants to know if she can be connected with the other subjects, when they're ready. Evelyn looked at him. She wants to talk to people who understand. Cole thought about this, about the specific value of that. Not a support group in the formalized sense, not a managed clinical environment, but just people who had been through the same inexplicable thing talking to each other. When they're ready, he said. Not before. Park's probably close. Carver's not there yet. I know. She looked out the windshield. Margaret Osei's family called this morning. Her daughter. She wants to meet. He nodded. Margaret Osei, the woman in the Aurora facility, the one with the good days and bad days. Her daughter, whose name Cole didn't have yet, but would have by the end of the day. I'll go next week. I'd like to come, Evelyn said. He looked at her. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She held his gaze. I want to. They're people I'm responsible to. Not legally, actually. She said it without drama. I need to be in the room. Okay, he said. He drove them back to the NeuroCore building. The city moved past the windows in the particular slow way cities moved on gray November days, so less vivid, more honest, the colors of things without the enhancement of good light. Cole found he didn't mind it. There was something about weather that didn't try to make things look better than they were that matched the current mode of his life, the mode where the work was real and the outcomes were uncertain, and the days were full of things that mattered and didn't resolve neatly and required you to come back tomorrow anyway. The trial started in February and ran for 11 days. Cole testified on days 3 and 4. He sat in the witness stand and answered questions for 6 hours over 2 days with the same clarity he'd given the depositions. And he looked at Cross once, directly, across the courtroom. Not to communicate anything, not with hostility, just to not pretend the man wasn't there. Cross was in a suit and looked like himself, and had the expression of a man following the proceedings with professional interest, which was probably both performance and genuine, because Cross had always been the kind of person who found the mechanics of things interesting even when the mechanics were running against him. Cross's defense team was good. They worked the classified nature of the source code, the lack of direct physical evidence connecting Cross personally to the subjects, the plausible deniability architecture of the shell companies. They made arguments that were technically coherent and that Cole could see taking hold with 1 or 2 of the jurors, because the arguments were built for the jurors who wanted an exit from the uncomfortable conclusion, who wanted the complexity to excuse them from certainty. But Voss's testimony was 11 hours across 3 days, and Voss knew everything, and Voss told all of it. The verdict came back on a Friday afternoon. Guilty on 7 of 9 counts. The 2 counts that came back not guilty were peripheral. Conspiracy charges that the defense had successfully made look unprovable at the specific standard required, which was a legal outcome and not a factual one, and which Chen told Cole afterward in the hallway outside the courtroom she'd expected. 7 is enough, she said. Sentencing in 6 weeks. He's looking at 18 to 22 years, which at 60 means he's looking at the rest of his operational life. Cole nodded. He thought about Cross putting his hands up in the sublevel of Meridian with no one pointing anything at him, choosing in that moment to be a person who didn't run. And he thought about whether that choice at the end meant something about the person or whether the person was defined by the 30 years of choices that led to that moment. He thought it was probably both, which was not a comfortable conclusion, but was probably the accurate one. He walked out of the courthouse into the February cold and called Ava. She answered on the second ring. "Well?" "Guilty," he said. 7 counts. A long exhale. "Okay," she said. "Okay." A pause. "Are you okay?" "Yeah." "You sure? You sound like the kind of okay that's actually complicated." "It's always complicated," he said. "But yes, I'm okay. I'm making dinner," she said. "Come home." He stood on the courthouse steps for a moment. The February sky was the clear, cold blue that Colorado got when the temperature dropped and the air went crystalline. The mountains visible from here, sharp and white and very close-looking the way they always seemed after cold fronts pushed through. He looked at them for a moment. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, he said. "I'm making pasta," she said. "The kind with the lemon." "That's the only one you make." "It's the only one that's worth making." She paused. "Dad?" "Yeah." "I'm glad it's over." He thought about whether it was over in the way she meant, the specific chapter of it, the trial and the courtroom, and cross his face across a room, and decided that yes, that chapter was over. The other chapters were ongoing. The visits to Janet Carver and the texts from Theo Park, and Sandra Reyes learning to trust the map of her own mind again, and Margaret Osei's daughter, whose name turned out to be Grace, 32, who had come to the first meeting with a notebook full of her own documentation because she was that kind of person, and who had cried exactly once during it and then composed herself and said, "What can I do to help?" in the voice of someone who had been waiting to ask that question for a year. Those chapters were not over, but they were chapters with forward motion in them, which was different from the chapter that had been cross, which had been stuck for 3 years. "Me too," he said. "I'll see you soon." He got in the car and drove home. Home was an apartment in the Jefferson Park neighborhood of Denver, on the 3rd floor of a building that had better light than the one in Denton, and a landlord who was slightly more communicative, which was not uniformly a good thing, but was at least different. Ava had painted her room in a color she'd described as terracotta, but which Cole privately thought of as the color of very committed autumn leaves. The constellation stickers from Denton were on the ceiling above her bed, transferred intact, some of them slightly repositioned because the ceiling geometry was different. She'd asked him, the night she put them up, if it was weird to bring them. He told her it was exactly right. The pasta was done by the time he got upstairs, which meant she'd timed the start correctly based on his 40-minute estimate, which meant she'd been tracking his drive, which he noticed and which told him something about her current state that she wouldn't have offered directly. He hung up his coat and washed his hands and sat at the kitchen table that was the same table from Denton, relocated, the same slight wobble in the left rear leg that he'd never fixed because he'd gotten used to compensating for it. Ava served the pasta. It had the lemon and the parmesan and the black pepper in quantities that were slightly too generous on all 3 counts, which was how she'd been making it for 2 years, and which was exactly right. They ate, and she told him about school. The Jefferson Park School's art program had, in the 3 months since she'd enrolled, turned out to be as good as the Low-Do Gallery feature had suggested. She was in 2 studio courses and an art history elective that she'd been skeptical of and had turned out to love, specifically because the teacher talked about art in terms of what it cost the artist and what it gave back, which was, Ava said, the most honest framework she'd ever been given for making anything. "She said something today that I keep thinking about," Ava said, twirling pasta. "She said the reason people make things, art, whatever, is because they need to put something outside of themselves that's been inside too long. And that the making isn't about the object you make, it's about the transfer, the getting it out." Cole thought about this. "Do you believe that?" "I think I do." She looked at her plate. "I started a drawing last week. Of Mom." He looked at her. "Not from a photo," she said. "From memory. Which is probably wrong in some places. But it felt..." She paused. "It felt like something I needed to do." She looked up at him. "Is that okay?" "Yes," he said. "That's more than okay." She nodded and ate. He ate. The kitchen was warm and it smelled like lemon and garlic and the specific warmth of a place where someone had been cooking. And outside the window, the Denver night was doing what Denver nights did in February, cold and clear and very still. He thought about what the art teacher had said. The transfer. Getting something outside of yourself that's been inside too long. He thought about Lily, which he did every day, in the same way he did. Not as loss exactly, or not only as loss, but as the presence of someone who was not present, which was its own distinct thing. He thought about what he'd told Theo Park, the thing that's actually yours, regardless of what anyone else says about the story. Lily was his in that way, the specific reality of who she'd been. The still water quality, and the hands that moved when she talked, and the way she'd looked at him the night Ava was born with an expression he would never be able to fully describe but could still access in complete detail. That was his. Nobody could get to that. "Tell me about the drawing," he said. Ava looked up. Something shifted in her face, the wariness of someone who had been expecting the subject to be redirected, recalibrating toward the surprise of being asked. "She's laughing," Ava said. "In the drawing. I don't know why that's the memory that came first, but it's the clearest one I have. She's laughing at something I said, and I can't remember what I said, but I can remember the way she laughed." She looked at him. "Do you remember what she sounded like when she laughed?" "Yes," he said. "I can't always hear it in my head anymore. I can remember the shape of it, but not the sound." She looked at her plate. "Is that normal, to lose the sound first?" "I don't know if it's normal," he said, "but I think it's common." She nodded. 8. "I want to show you the drawing when it's done, if that's okay." "I would really like to see it," he said. She nodded again, and they ate, and the apartment held them the way apartments held people who were figuring out how to be in them. Imperfectly, provisionally, with all the small wrongnesses of any place that is new enough that you're still learning its specific gravity. He thought about the first Monday at NeuroCore, getting lost, finding the conference room with the mountain view. He thought about Janet Carver's bad facility coffee and Theo Park's photograph from Tacoma and Sandra Reyes saying, "Let's start from right now." He thought about the verdict in Cross's face and Chen in the hallway saying 7 is enough with the satisfaction of someone who had done a hard thing correctly. He thought about Evelyn at the board meeting, telling the skeptical director that guarantees in situations like this were what people offered when they didn't understand the situation. The thing he respected most about her, of all the things there were, was that she had never once offered a guarantee she couldn't back with something real. In a world that ran on the currency of confident promises, the discipline of saying, "I don't know, and I can't ensure that, and here is what I can actually do," was rarer than it should have been. He'd learned it from the same hard place she'd learned it. The difference was the shape of the lesson. They were still learning to work together, which was its own ongoing negotiation. Their rhythms were different. Their defaults were different. She moved faster, and he moved more carefully, and both of them knew the other's approach was valid and still found it occasionally maddening, which Rosa had told Cole, with the directness of 12 years in this work, was the sign of a functional collaboration. "If you never find each other maddening," she'd said, "one of you isn't actually showing up." They were both showing up. After dinner, Ava did her homework at the kitchen table and Cole sat in the chair by the window, the chair from Denton, same one, and looked at the city. Denver at night was a different animal than Denver in daylight, smaller and more honest, the light from the buildings making the shapes of things visible against the dark without the competing brightness of the sun. He could see a slice of the mountains if he angled right, just the suggestion of them, darker dark against the dark sky, the fact of them rather than the sight. He thought about what this was. This specific thing, the apartment and the pasta and the drawing in progress and the work tomorrow and the 4 people in 4 different situations being moved slowly toward something that was not recovery exactly. That word was too clean for what the process actually looked like, but was forward motion, something rather than nothing. He thought about what Cross had said in Meridian. "I'm not your enemy. I'm your only option." The arrogance of that. The way certainty about your own purpose could close off the part of your mind that was supposed to ask, "What if I'm wrong?" Cross had never, in 22 years, asked that question with any seriousness, and the answer to it had run his entire operation aground. Cole had asked it for 3 years in Denton. He'd asked it in the wrong direction. What if staying hidden is the wrong choice? But he'd asked it, and eventually the answer had shown up in the form of a photograph and a phone call, and a woman in a locked room writing in a notebook, and his daughter saying, "You sound like yourself," as if being himself was something that had been temporarily in question and had now been resolved. It had been temporarily in question. That was true, and the resolution of it was not dramatic. It wasn't a single moment of clarity. It was a series of small decisions. To go back to Denton for the drive, to bring the transmitter into Meridian, to take the job, to go to the care facility in Colorado Springs, to sit with Janet Carver and drink bad coffee and listen to crossword stories. A series of small decisions that added up to a direction, which was all a life ever really was. He was not a different person than he'd been with the mop. He understood himself now as a person who could do this kind of work, which was the same thing he'd always been. Someone who could move in difficult conditions and hold a clear line when everything around the line was chaos, just applied to a different kind of difficult. The conditions were harder to navigate because the weapons were words and the damage was invisible and the victories were incremental and you never got to know, cleanly, whether you'd won. He could live with that. In some ways it suited him better than the alternative, because the alternative had always required him to not look too closely at what he was building toward, and this required the opposite. Ava finished her homework and put her books away and stuck her head around the corner from the hallway. "I'm going to sleep," she said. "Okay." "You're doing the thing where you sit and think." "I'm doing the thing where I sit and think." "Good thoughts or complicated thoughts?" He considered this. "Complicated thoughts that are mostly good," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "That's the best kind," she said, with the simplicity of someone who had figured this out independently and was glad to have it confirmed, and she went to bed. He sat for a while longer. The city was quiet the way cities got late. Not silent, never silent, just settled into its overnight register. He thought about calling Evelyn and decided against it because it was late and because whatever he would have said could wait until morning, and also because some things were better as thoughts than as conversations, at least for now, at least until he had a clearer sense of the shape of what the thought was. He thought about Lily. He let himself do this the way he'd learned to, not as an interruption of the present, but as a part of it. The way the mountains were a part of Denver even when you couldn't see them, even on gray days when they were invisible behind the clouds. They were still there. Their presence didn't go away just because the conditions made them hard to see. He got up eventually and went to the window and looked at the city and the dark beyond it for a moment. Then he went to bed. In the morning he would go to NeuroCore and there would be work, the fourth subject's second support meeting, the debrief from Theo Park's therapist, the financial restitution documents for Carver's family that needed his signature, and an intake meeting with the HR restructuring team about the new oversight protocols Evelyn was implementing across all research divisions. In the afternoon, he and Evelyn had a call with a neurological specialist in Boston who had experience specifically with the kind of damage done to Margaret Osei, and Cole needed to read the specialist's prior research before the call, which he had not yet done and would need to do in the morning before anything else. The work was real, and it was incomplete, and it would require him tomorrow and the day after, and for a long time forward. It did not offer the clean resolution of a mission with an end state. It offered something smaller and larger at the same time, the daily fact of showing up to something that mattered, and doing it as well as he could without lying to himself about whether he was doing it perfectly. He was not doing it perfectly. He was doing it, which was the available option and the right one. He closed his eyes in the dark apartment with the city outside and the mountains beyond the city, and Ava asleep down the hall with the constellation stickers on her ceiling, the same ones from Denton, repositioned but intact. And he thought about what it meant to carry something across a change and have it still be itself on the other side. It meant the thing was real. It meant it belonged to you. It meant that all the loss and displacement and small daily costs of the years had not managed to take the actual center of it, which was love, which was the most durable material he'd ever encountered in a long career of testing the durability of things. He slept. Outside, Denver settled into its overnight stillness, and the mountains stood where they always stood, invisible in the dark and completely present, and the morning was already on its way.